Chapter 91 Frost Rune. Deep inhale. Hold. Long exhale. The air up here just smelled better. It didn't carry the stickiness of humidity or earthy smells of the jungle. It was a hint of pine and a slight undertone of forest. Well, it would be until I finished my preparation. Then it would be something else. Hopefully. Getting away from the camp was surprisingly easy. As soon as I went to Abigail and my dad, who were together for some reason, they didn't fight. Initially, when I found them together, I thought I was in for a slog of an argument, but none of that happened. They almost seemed to expect it. All Abigail did was make sure I had everything planned and made sure I didn't forget anything. All my dad said was to be careful and that sometimes retreating was the honorable choice. It was weird. The whole trip back I thought they were planning something. Like they were going to pop out and say psych before laying into me about how stupid a decision this was. I didn't know how to feel about them not putting up a fight. I should be happy that they weren't babying me, but the lack of pushback had a certain feeling of its own. Well, I couldn't dwell on that for too long. I had shit to do. The conversation with the two didn't last long and I made it back to camp late into the night. There were only a few things that we had to go over. Handing the baton to Abigail in terms of negotiation took longer than originally anticipated, but I still got out of there pretty quickly. I had handled the negotiation between our two camps so far, but now that I wouldn't be there, Abigail would be in charge of that. She was always going to be in charge of that. It just came quicker and more abrupt than a smooth handover. The negotiation with Tracy wasn't that difficult, all things considered. She stated what the rules in her camp were, and they were about what I expected. She took all of the points people gathered from hunting and the waves, confiscating them to use on the camp as a whole instead of the individual. There were a few more odd rules, but I made it clear we would not be following that. Giving up all of our points was out of the question. I settled to keep the same ration as before and promised her half. That way, my family could feel like nothing changed, other than the scenery. She tried to fight me on it and push back, but I shut that down quickly. I was under the assumption that we were helping each other. Relinquishing all of our points was not what partners did. Honestly, she was lucky to get half. If that wasn't the standard we already had in place, I would have negotiated for less. Sigh. That was all Abigail's problem now, though. She would have to handle all of that, and I got to wash my hands of it. I would still check in to make sure everything was fine, but I wouldn't be in charge of it anymore. It gave me time to focus on other things. Getting back as late as I did, sleep was first up on the to-do list. A quick few hours of Z's later, and now it was time to prepare. I had just over 30 hours to get ready for the hardest wave yet. I couldn't keep the feeling of giddiness from rising. I was excited. The first thing I had to do was destroy all the buildings. All the lodges and workstations would only get in the way, and I didn't want that. I couldn't stand in a gateway like I had previously. I would be fighting inside the walls. The 4 gates should stem the tide a little bit, and the fight would take place after they got through. I would leave them open as well. Closing them would just make me have to repair them needlessly after the wave broke them. The buildings would help corral the beasts further, but they would also get in the way of my fighting. I usually sent ice spinning around me, and buildings would get in the way of that. Destroying them was quite fun. I didn't have to use my hammer, but I certainly did. It was a bit sad to tear down all that we had built, but that didn't stop the smile on my face while I did it. Tearing things down was a lot more fun than building them. After flattening out the area except for the keep, I couldn't destroy that. The next step was ready. When I arrived the previous night, I flared permafrost until my mana ran dry to prepare. Some of the effects of the skill melted overnight, but most had stayed, and frozen chunks of ice lingered around the camp. I wanted to turn it into a land of ice and snow permanently, and I had just the way to do it. After the Blaze Lions, I came up with a way to fix the weakness of my environment. It was a lot harder to turn an existing tundra against me than it was neutral ground. The way I went about turning the area into a tundra was twofold. The first was using permafrost whenever my mana allowed. The second was a bit different and took a more delicate touch. Runes were powerful things, expensive things as well, and I came up with a way to use them more effectively. They weren't restrained to only be used on weapons and equipment like I had been using them. They were woven into the walls and the keep in a grand tapestry. They could do far more than how I used them. What would take most of the 30 hours of prep time I had was this project. I wanted to weave a rune into the very earth itself. If I put a frost rune under the ground I fought on, then it should aid me in turning the area into the land I desired. Buying the rune was another hit to the wallet, but if it worked, it would be well worth it. The first thing I had to do was adjust the size. Every rune I had engraved thus far was the size of my hand or slightly larger, not the size of a football field. I had to make sure the proportions stayed the same and that it was scaled appropriately. Too far away from the original shape made it a different rune entirely. Basic runecrafting helped tremendously with this task. After upgrading my profession and gaining the skill, all runecraft was a smidge easier. The skill helped me know when the rune deviated too far from its original shape. There were a few kinks I had to work out through the process, but I believed it would work. The first was how I was going to actually make the rune. Engraving took material away from the source in the shape of the rune and was one of the weakest ways to create a rune. Pulling strength from what was removed rather than added was a weaker way of going about it, but was both easier and cheaper. It was the reason low-level runes were engraved rather than inlaid. The low power of the rune wasn't worth using precious material to inlay it. That became a problem when I started carving lines into the ground. Fighting was messy and chaotic. There was no way the lines would survive the fight without getting messed up, whether from blood contaminating it or from feet and claws smudging it. Since carving the rune was out, the subtractive method, inlaying the rune was the only thing left, the additive method. That opened a whole new can of worms. Like, what would I make the rune out of? From information I'd bought and gathered from the store before and more recently, different alloys of metal were common for use in equipment, but what I was attempting to do was different. What I was making was closer to a ward than an enchantment on equipment. While both were made of runes, they functioned differently. Wards were common for stationary defenses and the like, while enchantments were smaller and designed to go on swords and other gear. The difference in size and utility prompted two different styles of creation. There were more uses for runes than those two, and it wasn't limited to just the two techniques total, but those were the two I was worried about right now. Wards were usually anchored to the area they were made, and that was where they drew strength from. What they were made of was a big part of how strong they were and what effects they had. A ward could use countless materials, from metal and stone all the way to crystal and blood. What the rune was made of altered what it did. It wouldn't alter a rune completely, but the medium through which the rune was expressed colored the meaning slightly. It was like drinking water through a filter made of orange peels. It was still water, but with a hint of orange in it. I browsed the store for different things I could make it out of and constantly winced at the prices. It wasn't even the cost of material that was bad. It was the amount I needed. Our camp was huge, and to fill the entire area with the rune would take a lot of material. As I planned, thoughts of how to go about it shuffled around. My plan was to make one giant rune covering the entire area inside the walls. It was probably the least efficient way to do it, and any experienced runesmith would probably weep at my amateur design, but it was the best I could do. It was better to make one giant rune and hope it worked, than to guess at chaining them together in an order that worked. I didn't have the time to learn how to do it any differently. I almost bit the bullet and bought one of the crystal options before I stopped myself. I was being stupid. Why should I buy crystal when I could make crystal? Ice wasn't technically the type of crystal wards were meant to use, but why wouldn't it work? It was free to me and I could shape it however I desired. It didn't hurt to try, and it would only waste time to attempt, so I did it. I wanted to finish before the wave came, and if this failed, I wouldn't have time to try again, but I felt it was worth the attempt. I had already marked out on the ground the lines and curves of the rune. Now all I had to do was make it. Ice was fragile and prone to breaking if we fought on top of it, and would lead to the same problem that carving did, so I added an extra step. Permafrost did what its name entailed and froze the top layer of the earth, creating a layer of permafrost. If I buried the ice deep enough, it wouldn't be disturbed from the fighting. I wasn't sure how it would affect the power of the rune by being buried, but it shouldn't affect it too much. The hardest part of the whole process was that I couldn't physically see what I was doing. I used permafrost to create ice underneath the ground before using ice manipulation to mold it into the right shape. Since I couldn't see it, I had to rely on ice manipulation, entirely to feel out where the ice was and if it was the right shape. My range wasn't big enough to fit the whole rune, which added an extra layer of difficulty. I couldn't see the entire rune at once and was only ever dealing with sections of it. The process took hours. It was painstakingly difficult, and by the end, my mind was on fire. Using ice manipulation, for that long was hard and stressed my mind's capabilities. It was the repetitiveness of creating the ice, shaping the ice, going over it again to smooth it out, and then putting the finishing touches on for uniform thickness and width. I would do all that for one line at a time before moving on to the next section. After the rough shape of the rune was down, I had to go back and even everything out. Sure, I tried to make everything uniform when I first made it, but when I was only looking at a few feet at a time, little deviations added up that were easy to miss. The curves especially. I tried to make the curves uniform, but it was easy to lose the forest for the trees. I would think that it was fine before stepping back to realize it wasn't. After the hours of freezing everything into roughly the right shape, it took hours more tweaking and shaving down to make it perfect. Well, as close to perfect as I could get. After getting everything right, nothing happened. I expected it to, flash into being. After nothing happened, I went back to correct any mistakes. For a fourth time, again nothing happened. For the fifth, sixth, seventh, all the way to over 10 tries and nothing happened. I was ready to rip it out of the ground by the dozenth time. Going back over it anymore wouldn't lead to anything productive. It was at this point I had an epiphany. Runes didn't require a power source on equipment because of their size and ability to draw mana from the material it was engraved on. Wards, on the other hand, needed a power source. Whether it be the surroundings or a mana battery of some kind, a power source was required. The size of the rune and the effect I wanted was too strong for the ambient mana the rune was capturing. After noticing my fuck-up, some screams of frustration sounded out in the camp. Maybe a few curses too. Who's to say? I didn't have the know-how or the rune schematic for making a siphoning or gathering rune of some kind to gather mana from the area, so that left option 2. Power source. This being the first time I had done this, I had no clue what was needed. I assumed using a mana stone would work, but how large of one was required? They got increasingly expensive as their size went up. Getting an ice mana stone directly sounded better, but it cost more as well. I was sick of going back and buying information from the store and was, frankly, fed up with the whole process. So I did something else. It would either work or it wouldn't. It was already dark by now, and the entire day had gone by with me tinkering with it. My head was on fire from using ice manipulation, So much in my frustration with the stupid rune was at a peak. At certain times in life, saying fuck it was necessary. This was one of those times. I bought the largest ice affinity mana stone I was willing to spend points on without a second thought. It took some redneck engineering to tie the two together, but I worked it out. I couldn't just shove the mana stone into the ground and hope for the best. I went to the center of the rune and dug down into the earth, deep under the rune. I didn't want the stone anywhere near the surface. Calling it a stone was a misnomer. Mana stones were made of crystal, not stone. Why they had that name was a mystery, and one I didn't care about right now. I placed the stone under the center of the rune before adding a tendril of ice to connect the two. There was most likely some way to connect the two without a physical connection, but I didn't know how. As soon as the two were connected, mana shot down the ice of the rune and spiraled out into the curves and structure all over the camp. I could feel the ice mana with ice manipulation, as it spread through the camp. It flowed down the lines of the rune, saturating the ice it was made of. As the last of the ice was filled with mana, frost began to coalesce in the air. The ground froze over, and the bits of frost left over from permafrost expanded out. I watched in real time as the environment changed. Ice coated the ground and snowflakes started forming in the air. The temperature plummeted by the minute, and it showed no signs of stopping. This was what I wanted. I couldn't help but break out into manic laughter. All the hours slaving away creating it was worth it. It was exactly what I wanted. It changed the very mana in the air into ice mana. Every other kind either fled the area or was converted. After a few minutes, the only thing left was ice and frost mana. It was wonderful. After the rune completed, notification chimes sounded out, but I was too busy watching the fruit of my labor to check. Now that I looked them over, I couldn't help but start another round of laughter. Congratulations! You have leveled up. Congratulations! You have leveled up. Congratulations! You have leveled up. Skills available. You have upgraded a skill. Ice manipulation. Common. Dash. Ice manipulation. Uncommon. Mana engraving. Common. Dash. Mana engraving. Uncommon. 3 profession levels pushing me to level 35 and a new skill as well as an upgrade for one of my most fundamental skills. Oh, I was ready now. Chapter 92 Freedom. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, F. Human. Class, F. Champion of Nibelheim. Rare, level 43. Profession, F. Runic Blacksmith. Uncommon, level 35. Affinity, Ice. Faction, Zelensky family. Temporary, faction head. Strength, 349. Agility, 182. Perception, 82. Fortitude, 295. Endurance, 148. Vitality, 86. Intelligence, 67. Wisdom, 150. Acumen, 56. Free points, 0. Laws, least law of ice. Skills, boiler. The sleep following the creation of the rune was some of the best rest I had gotten in a while. I felt at home and relaxed in a way I couldn't explain. The ice and snow worked to make me comfortable and rested, which I hadn't experienced in a while. Following the best rest I had received was the biggest battle I would participate in. As noon neared, my blood started pumping just a bit faster. My heart beat a tad louder. My hands itched toward my hammer. It would soon be me versus an army. One against many, and I couldn't wait to see who would be left standing. Most of my preparation time was allotted to getting the rune working, and that was already done. Other than a few small things left, all that was left to do was eat breakfast and wait for the wave. I thought about pounding a few pieces out in the forge but decided against it. The times of scrambling around doing everything I could, clawing for every scrap of power, were over. There was no one else here to worry about. No one that could get hurt if I wasn't strong enough. It felt like the boulder on my back that had forced me to keep training every hour of the day was removed. I didn't have to spend every waking moment trying to get stronger. While I wasn't forced to anymore, that didn't mean I didn't want to. With strength, I could be more free than ever before. If I was strong enough, nothing and no one would be able to dictate what I did. The only thing I would do was what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do right now was relax and wait for the fight to come to me. Before my family was hounded by the threat of death, I enjoyed the battles. The fighting and battle for survival. When there was the possibility of my family dying, it was less fun. Now, though it was only me, felt weird to put it like that. It made it sound like I didn't value my own life as much as theirs. In some ways, that was true. In a fight, I wanted them to be safe and would hurt myself to make that true. Being alone cut away all the worry and dread of that possibility. The only difference between us was I liked being a warrior. I liked the knockdown, drag-out fights for dominance. If I failed, I would die, but that was the way of the world. I was fine with going out like that. My family would be upset, sure, but I would be okay with it. I couldn't think of a better way to go. That didn't mean I was suicidal. I would flee from an unwinnable battle if I could. But the possibility of death was always there. It was what made it worth it. The satisfaction wouldn't be the same if the threat of dying wasn't there. "I'm here for a good time, not a long time," was a saying I quite liked and fit the mood perfectly. My new hammer was ready for its christening, and I was ready to fight to my heart's content. I sat in front of the keep with only ice and snow to keep me company. My armor and hammer sat next to me, ready to be used as the sun reached its zenith. There was no need to flare permafrost before the wave as much as possible, as it was already tundra. Defend your claim. Wave start 0:59. For the first time, dread didn't follow that notification. No sharp intakes of breath, no silent prayers, no clenched fists. The only thing that followed the chime was a slight smile. Some might say the smile of a crazy person, aka Abigail, but a smile nonetheless. After the chime, I stood and lifted my chest piece over my head before firmly pulling it on, latching it in place. All the rest of my armor was already on, my legs and boots already worn, and my chest piece was the only thing left to don. It was uncomfortable to wear while sitting. My mana pool was entirely pure ice mana for the fight, and the first skill I used showed the improvement. Frost armor slowly froze around me and settled into place. It felt more robust in the environment and like I didn't have to fight to keep it frozen. It was in its natural state rather than the other way around. Newly upgraded ice manipulation flared around me and my projectiles were ready. The upgrade increased both fine manipulation and range. What was once 30 feet ballooned out to over 50. I still liked my snowflakes and had a few floating around me even though it was more efficient to use something else. They took too much focus to keep in shape and spinning, saying nothing of maintaining the rotation around me. It took a load off mentally to just use whatever chunks of ice were available. Instead of focusing on the snowflakes, work broader and just spin anything. I could manipulate a lot more ice if I didn't have to focus on each projectile individually. All or nothing was easier than picking specific pieces of ice. I had already frozen some into shape with the time I had, but I wouldn't refreeze them if they broke like I had been doing. As the timer ticked down, I didn't even have to use any skills. Permafrost was unnecessary as the ground was already frozen, and hail was unneeded as I already created enough ice for me to use. I had stockpiled it after the rune started working. It kept it from melting and saved me from having to make more during the battle. Any more was useless, I had created more than enough. I tried to go and activate Momentum of the Avalanche, early but couldn't find any monsters nearby. I went as far out as I was comfortable with without seeing a single monster. It was like all of them fled the area. It was like they knew what was coming. Not having the boost wasn't that big of a deal though. The start of the wave was always the easiest, the boost was unnecessary. It was the end when I needed it the most and it was already full by then. The extra endurance would be nice, but with the new frost rune, not as useful. I was all set for the wave to come and I didn't have to wait long. The timer ended and the wave spawned in. I had made my way to the top of the keep where Hal usually stood to get a look at the enemy. The makeshift crow's nest we built. My perception and vision skills weren't up to par with them so far away, but I could see the movement of bodies. All it took was a hefty javelin throw and the avalanche started. It would only add the few minutes it took for the monsters to get here, but it seemed silly to wait. I could pick up more details as the monsters closed in and I couldn't help but giggle. I wasn't sure if it was fate, luck, or divine intervention, but I was at a severe advantage for the fight to come. Vine bears. Nature affinity bears with vines extending out around them. They sent plants against me. Plants. In my brief foray in the south, I saw how badly plants held up against the cold. Not well. That was how. The only thing that could have been better was if they had a water affinity. I didn't suspect the bears themselves to have that hard of a time, but their vine extremities certainly would. Any advantage was a good advantage, and I would certainly take it. The bears themselves were normal-sized, bigger than me by a lot. It made me question how big the boss would be. Green-tinted fur covered them, and they had vines coiled around their body. Some of the vines extended out like green vipers waving in the air. The grass turned a verdant green as they passed over it, leading to the wall. Javelins of ice streamed out of the crow's nest I was in until they got close enough to the wall. With a jump, I fell to meet them in a grand melee. Ice manipulation, flared out and I picked up all the stray ice in the area. It was the most ice I had ever used. The mass of glistening shards slowly started to rotate around me, getting faster and faster every subsequent revolution. The bears funneled in through the 4 open gates, itching to rip and destroy. Snarls and growls filled the area, which only made me smile wider. Spittle flowed from their open mouths. No yelling or coordinating. No voices from anyone nearby. Only beasts. Inhale star. Ha ha ha. Come and get me. I answered with a challenge of my own. As the bears made it into the camp, the first of my defenses was up. Grand pillars of ice packed down as far as I could with my new uncommon manipulation skill and law combined. One grand shatter rippled out, causing all of them to explode. The massive explosion of ice tore through the leading bears, felling the first few ranks. I waited until a few were past the pillars for the most effect, but ended up missing a few of the leading ones. That was fine. My hammer was ready. Heavy blow rocketed down on a bear's skull, flattening the brain into mush. It was now christened with the blood of a foe. And some brain matter. I spiraled, cutting, bludgeoning, and generally disrupting everything. The cold spread from the rune caused the vines to shrivel and die if they extended too far from the bodies of the bears. It seemed they used them for grappling and restraining prey, except they couldn't this time. The vines couldn't extend past a few inches without dying due to the cold. I wasn't sure how cold it actually was around me, but I felt great. Great plumes of smoke wafted in the air from the heavy breathing of the bears, creating a mist effect as it condensed into even more ice crystals before falling to the ground as snow. Without the need to keep permafrost or hail active, it let me use my mana pool way more freely and skills activated faster. Heavy blow and frostbite flowed more liberally along with ice arrow The speedy projectiles flew out whenever there was a lull near me. My localized cyclone of ice disrupted their charge, which created slight gaps for me to fire the skill. The water content in the vines began to freeze around the bears the longer they stayed within my domain, giving me an option I had never had before. What would happen if I used shatter on a frozen body part? Carnage. That was what. If their blood didn't freeze as soon as it left their body, it would be pooling into a sea from the sheer amount. As chunks of the red liquid froze over, ice manipulation told me I could use them, creating a projectile out of the frozen blood of one bear, then using it to impale another bear, before making the entire bear shatter as it froze over after death. Was wonderful. Even at the rate I was killing them, more took their place. I hadn't expected so many to spawn, but I wasn't going to back down. The last wave spawned nearly 500 monsters for 21 people. This wave spawned nearly 300 just for me. It made me wonder if there was a strength adjustment as well, but I quickly vetoed that idea. Punishing people for gaining strength defeated the purpose of the tutorial. It was more likely that there was a minimum amount each wave would spawn, and the allocated amount for one person was under that amount. Hence, more than anticipated. As the fighting continued, my boost built up even more. My stats were higher every wave, and the feeling of power was hard to get rid of. My hammer held up wonderfully. With ice manipulation at uncommon, I could hold the ice together a lot better and condense it down farther. It was a nice bonus to the durability of my weapon. An unforeseen bonus. I thought only an upgraded law would help. Whenever I got surrounded, Ice Fortress froze into reality. All the ice in the air rapidly condensed together into a divider between me and them. It froze so quickly that it shocked even me. It usually took some time to build up, which was removed with the building blocks readily available and the low temperature to assist in freezing. After my respite wasn't needed, shatter had it crumbling down with deadly precision. Being so close to where I was standing let me aim the shards much easier. As I fought, all my worries washed away. The tightness of breath I perpetually carried with me loosened. The mounting pressure released. There wasn't any anxiety for the future. No dread waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was only me versus my enemy. It was so simple I couldn't help but feel stupid. I had built up this idea of honor and responsibility into something that it wasn't. Honor and morals weren't a chain used to control yourself. They were aspirations to live by. You weren't kept in check by them through their control over you. You aspired to follow them through your own control. Using them as a band-aid for slipping self-control wasn't how they worked. One didn't magically follow their own rules just because they said they would. I was overthinking it and gaining clarity for the first time in a while. I was a warrior. I was no philosopher, no ethics professor. All I had to do was what I felt was right. My father's teachings wouldn't disappear, but they weren't shackles either. I would still follow them, not because I forced myself to, but because I wanted to. I might slip and fall sometimes, but that was life. No one was perfect, and trying to force myself to be was unrealistic. The only thing I could do was my best. After that realization, there was no big power-up, no new law or spirit anchor. Nothing new, but I fought better all the same. My hammer flowed better. My feet seemed to move smoother. My fighting turned from forced to free. This was it. This was freedom. For the first time in a while, I had fun. Chapter 93: Shatter. My hands gripped the frosty wood as I brought the hammer down on yet another bear. The fight had been going on for almost an hour, and wounds found their way through my armor. 2 or 3 bears clawing and pounding on my armor simultaneously caused injuries to get through. The blood seeping out of me didn't diminish the feeling of euphoria, though. This was some of the most fun I had in a while. A paw swipe clattered off my armor, and my hammer came screaming around in retaliation. A jaw clamped down, but I managed to interspace the shaft of my hammer in the way in time. Hammer locked up in the beast's mouth. I took both hands on either side of the snout and twisted. The bear's neck snapped before it thought to let go. Stupid thing died because it didn't. With Avalanche are over half built. I shifted my hand down the haft to the last handhold before the pommel and whipped it around one-handed at the bear charging at me. The bear's head turned to mist. My other hand pointed out, and an ice arrow flew out in the opposite direction to skewer a bear through the throat coming up behind me. Getting over the crutch of using my hand to cast was hard in the heat of battle. Shatter ripped the artery open as the arrow inside its throat exploded. More red-tinted ice was added to my arsenal. An unnoticed foe bit down on my leg while I was distracted watching the Red River freeze into weapons. My fortitude stopped my leg from breaking, but the teeth pinching my skin and mounting pressure still hurt. Punching down on the beast fixed that problem, but another took that opportunity to swipe me in the back. After getting thrown off balance, more piled on. A paw pounded into my chest before I could right myself, which led to another ramming into me. I was getting pushed around by their sheer mass. They had over a half-ton of body weight on me, and it was proving effective. Somehow, I ended up on the ground with all of them piling on top of me. Open maws filled with teeth obscured my vision and descended on me. Each one sought blood as they clamped closed. Pressure built up on my body, and frost armor started to crack. Teeth wiggled through and pierced my skin, drawing red liquid from me rather than them. This was one of the first times my armor had failed. Sure, it had cracked and let things through, but not like this. Panic bubbled up in me, and a hint of regret flashed in my head as the pressure on me mounted. After those thoughts, a boisterous laugh exploded out of me. Pressure, the heat of battle, the fight to the death. This was what I wanted. This got me going. It wasn't the same kind of pressure as before, it was different. A good kind of pressure. My body began to rev up like an engine, but instead of heating up, it cooled down. My mind whirled through ideas to get out of this situation while the bears continued crunching through my armor. After getting knocked over, I activated Reinforced Body to help defend, but it couldn't stop the wounds from appearing all over my body. Only one came to mind right away, and it was dumb. A good kind of dumb. I took hold of my armor with my law and strengthened it as much as possible, packing more ice into it as the bears sought to rip it apart. After empowering it as much as I could, Shatter detonated it, causing it to erupt around me. Since it was frozen to my body, ice shards pelted me just the same as the bears. The only difference was that I had the fortitude and affinity to help defend. The bears did not. Still, ice found its way past my skin and prickled all over where there wasn't metal armor to defend it. As condensed and durable as my armor was, Shatter was even more effective. The broken pieces of armor ripped through flesh with ease, creating rivers of blood that poured down on me. I hadn't thought the idea completely through and had my mouth open. It was unpleasant. The bears nearest died, and I scrambled up before more could pile on. My armor was gone, leaving me vulnerable. Before I could refreeze it, the bears took advantage. Claws drew blood and teeth bit through skin. Grunts of pain and anguish escaped from me. I fought and swung my hammer as fast as possible while switching to using Ice Fortress instead of Frost Armor The bears broke the armor down before it had time to finish covering me. For stout walls of ice rose into place around me and let me kill everything inside before more could jump on. As the last bear died, I took a second to catch my breath. I used a lot more energy getting up than the entire hour before it. Blood streaked down my form and dyed my armor red. Both from me and them. I had a slight limp and my body hurt all over. Pain shot through my hand as I picked up my hammer. I had discarded it after getting knocked down and used my fists instead. Now that I was up, I meant to pick it back up. As my fingers wrapped around the shaft, only 9 digits coiled the wood. A bloody stump was the only thing left of my left index finger. The pain shot up my arm after flexing my hand muscles, realizing the missing finger. How did I miss losing a finger? That was something I thought I would feel happening. The mixture of panic, adrenaline, and euphoria must have covered up the pain when I must have lost it. They were powerful drugs. A tighter grit of my teeth was my only response. At least it wasn't my pinky finger. That was where all the grip strength came from. Pain sounded out from almost everywhere on my body, and I hadn't felt this bad since the 10th wave when the wolves broke the gate down. The thought I might actually die bubbled up. Frost armor froze into place over a bleeding stump, staunching the flow of blood. It was a nice addition to the armor, and all it took to do that was a nudge with ice manipulation. After the armor was back in place, Shatter brought the walls down and began the fight anew. Pain lanced up my hand every now and again, but it wasn't something I couldn't fight through. The wounds elsewhere caused more pain than it, especially my leg. Every time I planted it to swing, pain laced up it. Something was fractured or strained. The rising momentum worked to stave off the exhaustion of battle, and my rising stats canceled out the fatigue. But it wouldn't last forever. My hammer took on a new life as it smashed into heads, torsos, and limbs alike. Shatter a ribcage of one before reversing direction and a slight twist of hand to have it flying hammer first in the other direction to rip off the bottom jaw of another. As soon as my boost hit 100%, my fists, let alone my hammer, punched through skulls with ease. The bone protection providing little defense. My killing speed reached its peak. My injuries had reached a peak as well. The lesser monsters fell quickly after that, but they gave their own before dying. After the last expired, another change of the waves was revealed. I was right in that it wasn't just a new direction. For beefed-up vine bears all roared from the open gateways. Identify, see, revealed their level to be higher than the normal bears. Vine bear, level 43. They were in the middle of the lesser bears and what the boss should be. The lesser bears started at level 40 and the boss should be at level 46. These fell in the middle and looked stronger than what their level should suggest. They were half again as tall as the previous bears and had rippling muscles tensed and ready for battle. It was too early to determine if these replaced the boss or they were in addition to the boss, but it would seem that every direction now got its own mini-boss for the waves. Lovely. Facing down the new quartet, I did something I hadn't done in a while. A massive ice fortress. Isolated one of the bears from the rest, leaving me one-on-one with it. Separate and conquer was my strategy. I wasn't sure if there was another big bad to act as the cherry on top for the wave and couldn't afford to fight all four at the same time recklessly. I was already huffing and puffing from the monsters before them. After raising the cage, I hobbled toward the singular occupant other than me. The other three started to pound on the ice surrounding the marked-off battlefield, trying to get in to no avail. The cold atmosphere worked to keep the ice frozen and even regenerated it somewhat. My foe isolated, I wasted no time attacking it. Even though it was bigger and stronger than the lesser bears, it couldn't hold up to my strength, especially alone. My hammer condemned it the moment it trapped in here against me. After giving it my full attention and harassing it with all my skills, I used both hands to bring down a mighty blow layered with both heavy blow, and frostbite, that smashed open its head. It didn't live much longer after that. After the first met its demise, I moved on to another. Separate with Ice Fortress, harass and wear down with Frostbite, and Ice Arrow, before finishing off with a hammer to the head. The last one didn't even last long enough to receive my hammer. With only one left, I didn't use Ice Fortress to isolate it. Instead, I picked up all the ice from the area and smothered the beast in it. All of the ice I was controlling flew to the bear, packing the over 2,000-pound ball of fur in an icy prison. After packing it all down, shatter made it all explode. The bear died quickly. I fell to a knee out of breath from the fight. I didn't give the four a chance to attack with any real strength. My mana pool took a hit to make that happen, but it was better than letting them hit me. I wanted to save Fury just in case. Their strength wasn't just for show, and I didn't risk a crippling injury. After the last mini-boss died, no notification chimed signaling the end of the battle. There was still one more. It made its presence known with an unmistakable roar. A massive beast over 10 feet tall shouldered its way into the northern gateway. The size of the boss made it barely fit inside without breaking the gate. After getting inside the gate, it stood on its hind legs, rising to over 20 feet in the air, and let out a challenging roar. Vine Bear Patriarch, level 46. A mixture of a grimace and a smirk found its way on my face as I straightened up, putting both feet under me. A wince escaped while standing that I couldn't stop. Frost plumed out from my mouth as my lungs bellowed air in and out as fast as they could from the open faceplate of my icy helmet. Ha! Maybe I am crazy, I huffed. I knew this would be hard. I knew this was borderline insane. But I couldn't help it. This was a battle. This was a fight. The ground thundered as the bear pounded into it, falling from its two-leg stance. The ground had two massive indents from the weighty paws impacting it. All right, you big bastard. You want a fight? I'll give you a fight. Fury flared out, giving a small reprieve. My hammer streaked through the air as I hurled the massive weapon at the beast. Its head recoiled from the impact and managed to look even angrier. I brought the hammer back with ice manipulation as the bear charged at me. The attack wasn't the most damaging nor most effective I could have done, but it was the fastest way to get the beast to shut up. This was my house, and it was challenging me. It didn't get to sit back and roar. It had no dominance to assert. My mana was low, my muscles burning from exertion and near failure. My law caused sharp spikes of pain behind my eyes from overdrawing on it. Even still, I rose to meet it. The bear lumbered toward me in a thundering gait as I rushed to meet it. I didn't have the mana or the stamina for a drawn-out fight, so I went all out from the beginning. Ice built up around my hammer as I ran, packing itself on the weapon. It ballooned in size to near comical proportions as more added on. Pulling back the enormous icy head, even more of my dwindling mana flowed into it, taking a decent chunk of what was left. Heavy Blow, and Frostbite, worked to saturate all the new ice added to the head. With the additional anchors, Ice Manipulation, worked overtime to propel it forward faster than my muscles could bear. Even with my massive boosts, my body was failing me. The fight had been going on for over 3 hours by now, and my body couldn't take it much longer. Momentum of the Avalanche, was a powerful skill, but it put a heavy strain on my body the longer it was active. As it built up, the ever-rising stats mitigated that strain. After peaking, not so much. I had pushed it past what my body was able to handle. The Band-Aid Fury, provided wouldn't last long. This was going to be a fast and brutal fight, and I would either win or lose quickly. I pulled on everything. All the ice around me responded to my call and flew to join my hammerhead as I brought it down in one massive blow. My swing met its and force exploded out, pushing all the snow on the ground and in the air away. My hammer recoiled back as well as the bear. Brief silence before another shockwave sounded, once, twice, thrice. Booms from the force rattled my bones. One last swing and I did something different. All the building ice transferred from the impact and built onto the limb of the bear, leaving my hammer barren. My hammer returned to its original size as ice crawled up the beast's arm, reaching higher every second as more ice transferred over. As the bear swiped at the growing icy cast, my law worked through it, strengthening it and condensing it down. I wrung what little I could out of it before it hit rock bottom. My law was shot. The bear started to panic, and I could see hints of confusion behind the madness in its eyes as the ice rose higher up the limb. It was questioning why I would forfeit the ice from my weapon. It didn't have to wonder long. Shatter, I even screamed the name. Luckily Austin wasn't here. I would never hear the end of it. I staggered to the ground as the last of my mental power was expended trying to direct the blast with ice manipulation. What was once a few 100 pounds of meat, bone, and fur turned into a twisted, grotesque stump. A wave of pink mist escaped the area in all directions before swinging back and forth as it fluttered to the ground as pinkish snow. Pain and anguish tainted a roar as the bear tried to process what happened. It waved the mangled limb around in the false hope what it was seeing was a lie. It wasn't. Blood poured from the limb in rivers. It tried to lumber toward me but fell to the ground on its mangled limb. It got back up quickly, but its 3 remaining limbs wouldn't let it move with any semblance of swiftness. Its remaining front leg hopped as it pulled itself toward my haggard form. Neither of us were in the best shape. This last blow would end it. The bear was a dead man walking as blood poured from the wound, and it wanted to take me down with it. Using both hands on my weapon to prop myself up, I readied for my last attack. My pace matched that of the hobbling 3-legged boss. I flipped my hammer around Spike first and lined up my blow. Heavy blow, failed to activate, leaving the blow skill-less save for what was left of my strength. I brought the hammer down with as much power as my 9 digits would allow, using the last of my strength. The spike buried itself 6 inches into the brain of the boss as blood leaked out of all the facial orifices. Standing over the body of my defeated foe, something welled up inside me. It felt like it came from the core of who I was. It needed something, but I had nothing left to give. My fight was won and my body was spent. A chime sounded out and I sagged. A torrent of energy flooded my body from the levels but did little to help how shitty I felt. I could tell from the amount it was more than 1 or 2 levels. Hammer forgotten. Frost armor fell off my supine form in pieces with a few chunks left behind. I did it. I felt the black encroaching on my vision and battled mentally to keep it at bay. My arm flopped around, grasping my tunic under my armor, ripping pieces of it off. I reached for my prepared health potions and only found broken bottles. Shit. I didn't even react to the pain as I smothered the stump of my index finger with the patches of torn tunic to stop the bleeding. During the fight, it never got a chance to clot. After shoving cloth over all the bleeding wounds, I could see and feel. Meditation, activated. I fought for as long as I could against the threatening black to give the skill as much time as possible before sleep claimed me. A bird fluttered and hopped down next to me before unconsciousness clouded over. Chapter 94, Hang 9. Abigail. Point of view. Abigail shivered from the piercing cold as they walked through the wreckage of their old camp. She and Austin had run up here as soon as the fight down south was over. The sturdy walls and superior numbers made this wave the easiest they had faced in a while. They could safely stand on the walls and decimate the wave from afar. It was the least stressful wave they had faced. She still remembered the indignation she felt when her dad let the matter go before Chris left. She expected him to be on her side and help convince Christopher out of his stupid idea. Abigail ended up going along with her dad, but that didn't mean she liked it. She still thought it was stupid and unnecessary. It took her dad saying she couldn't treat him as a kid any longer. He was grown and as such would make his own decisions. It was still stupid. Holy shit! He actually did it? Austin whispered as he took in the destruction around them. Hearing him say that made her want to ask if he thought Chris couldn't have done it, but the words died in her throat. The scene they had walked into was that breathtaking, and not in a picturesque way. It was so much destruction. All the buildings that once stood were gone, which was a shock. But she knew from the Beastmaster lady that was before the battle. There were bodies everywhere, frosted over and slightly snow-covered. The ground was a mixture of red and white from frozen water and blood alike. Spikes of ice stuck out of bodies, marking the cause of death, while others had obvious blunt force wounds. She fought the shivering her body wanted to do as they walked through the camp. It was so cold. It bit at her hands and feet and sapped the very heat from her bones. Austin was notably fine and glowing slightly, which only annoyed her more. They found Chris in the center of it all, passed out. Next to him was the boss of the wave, dead, with his hammer still stuck in its skull. The same bear that took multiple catapult shots to the face an entire squad of mage bombardments to take down during their fight down south. Chris himself wasn't in the best shape. His vitality had worked to stop the bleeding in the time it took them to get here, but the wounds would take a while yet to heal. He had dried blood covering most of his body, covering her vision from seeing how bad it was. A few skills flared around her as she scrubbed his body with water. The cold threatened to freeze her water, and she had to actively fight against it, which made everything harder. After getting his armor off and cleaning the blood, the cuts and bruises revealed themselves, and there were many. Over half his body was a variation of blue and purple from bruises or cuts actively reopened from the jostling. He looked like a dump truck ran him over, then reversed back and did it again a few times. One bruise was so deep, it was almost black. He most definitely had internal bleeding of some kind. Body scan C gave her a clearer picture of his injuries, and it was even worse than the outside. It would have been easier to point out which veins didn't have hemorrhages than those that did. Both his tibia and fibula were fractured in his left leg along with multiple ribs. He strained almost every muscle group, and he tore his right pectoral and bicep completely off the bone. And he was missing a finger. A glow cascaded over his body as she activated her healing skills, first focusing on the internal bleeding before she moved on to anything else. Reducing the swelling came first, then she would heal the fractures last. "How's he looking, Doc?" Austin joked. "Worse than he looks. Can you search around and find an index finger?" The cold should have kept it viable to be put back on, she ordered while using her skills. "Ha! He lost a finger." Austin laughed, declining to dignify that with a response. She remained silent. She didn't see how losing a finger was funny. While Austin poked around with his spear and kicked bodies over searching, she turned her full attention to healing. She brought her law to bear and used some more powerful skills. Chris's body was a pain to heal, and her new law helped a ton. She had only recently gotten it, and this was the first time she saw the effects on Chris. His body was usually too tough to injure during the waves, but this one was different, obviously. She and a decent number of her family had the water affinity. She had it, her dad had it, and granddad had it before he died. Not everyone did, less than half, but it was the majority affinity the family had. A bunch of them got together and bought a few treasures from the store to help in comprehending a water law. Splitting the costs helped them afford it. She focused on the renewing aspect of water for her law, and it helped her healing tremendously. It paired with her skill Waters of Renewal perfectly, and was where she originally gained the inspiration. Chris's body was washed with the healing waters, closing cuts and lightening bruises. She used a few more skills like Mend Bones C and Invigorate Healing C, but for the most part he would be fine. The only thing that worried her was the finger. She and the other healers had spent a decent amount of points reading about new healing practices, and this would be the first time she attempted to reattach something. In the hospital before, it was sewn back on with the nerves reconnected to the best of their ability. Here was different. All of the healing was different. One could shower someone with a healing skill without any knowledge of the body, and it would work. It would be terribly inefficient, but it would work. So many things changed in the healing field that they were still trying to keep up with. It was tough to stay ahead and not fall back on dated procedures. If the finger was still around and intact, it would most likely be fine. The ice would have worked to keep it frozen, and a good dose of healing should have it reattached just fine. He was lucky it wasn't an arm. She didn't think that was within her capabilities yet. They just had to find it first. Oof, wake. Chris's sudden coughing fit startled her out of her thoughts. Chris. Point of view. Ugh, I felt like death. Healing energies worked their way through my body, mending it back together from the meat blender I just put it through. I knew whose healing it was, and I wasn't surprised she was here. She probably came running as soon as the battle down south was over. I coughed and spit up the phlegm from my throat and opened my eyes to what was happening. The camp looked mostly the same as it had before I passed out. Ice and snow dominated the landscape with the recent decoration of bodies. I groaned for a different reason at the sight of the bodies. There was no one here to help clean them up. The aching pain I expected from sitting up was diminished to the point that it surprised me. I had known she had gotten her law, but this was the first time feeling the effects of it. It was a massive boost to her healing. Before I could form a question, a shout of exclamation interrupted. "Ha! Found it!" Austin's voice sounded out, making me turn my attention over to him. He was a ways off, standing in the middle of a thick bunch of bodies holding something over his head. He looked proud to be holding it, whatever it was. After shouting out, he came trotting over with his prize and presented it to Abigail. Getting a closer look at it, I saw what it was. It was my finger. I lifted my left hand to my face and stared incredulously. I had forgotten for a moment I was missing it. Only a stump was left, the finger cleaved off just above the connection to the hand. "How did you find that?" Couldn't help but ask. Losing it in the middle of battle, the finger could have been anywhere. Kicked around or impacted from the swirling ice. Literally anywhere. How it wasn't in one of the bear's stomachs was a blessing. I must have killed the bear before it could swallow. Ha! That thought made me chuckle. My missing phalange still had ice surrounding it from where frost armor are covered it. The ice kept it clean for the most part, and it wasn't even dirty from the ground. The frozen earth was too hard to sully it. "I have my ways," Austin said mysteriously. He stuck his hand out to help me up, which I accepted with a groan. "I can't believe it. You actually did it," he said while patting me on the back. "Me too. I'm glad I'm not dead," I answered, which got me a swat to the back of the head from Abigail. "Hey! I don't think doctors are supposed to hit their patients," I cried in false hurt. "They can when they say stupid things," she fired back. Laughter sounded out from my mouth and I couldn't stop it. It was nice to be back to a facade of normal with the two of them. I had missed joking around like this. Abigail manhandled my left hand, looking it over before doing the same to the finger. She was in healer mode again, and I wouldn't get much more out of her. Austin, on the other hand, looked ready to burst from holding something in. "High five," he said while raising his left hand. I just looked at him, unblinking at his self-satisfying smile. Well, high for? I guess." The little shit kept going, ignoring his antics. "How did the fight down there go? Everyone okay?" "Yeah. Everything went fine. Better than fine, actually. I hesitate to say more for fear of jinxing it," Abigail said while still looking over my hand. "That was good. I wasn't that worried, but it gladdened me to know everything went okay." Muttering I was trying to ignore found my ears. "But I have 5 and he has 4. So does that make it high 4.5? Austin looked genuinely confused while counting on his fingers. Nope, not adding fuel to the fire. Goading him would only make the finger jokes worse. He had more in the chamber, no doubt. We hadn't even gotten to the vulgar ones. Notifications were more important. "You have slain Vine Bear. Level 40, 1,600 points earned. You have slain Vine Bear. Level 41, 1,681 points earned. You have slain Vine Bear. Level 43, 1,846 points earned. You have slain Vine Bear Patriarch. Level 46, 2,116 points earned. You have successfully defended your claim. Extra experience awarded. 16,000 points to all who participated. Congratulations. You have leveled up. 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 Skills available. For levels. It was more than I had received in one go in a while. I struggled to remember the last time I got 4 levels at once. It brought me all the way up to level 47. Just 3 away from the evolution. The points, though, that was the real jackpot. Points earned, 517,662. One wave had netted me over 500,000 points. It was a much-needed windfall with bloodline prices so high. Even with the purchase of the Mana Stone, my current points rested at 1.2 million. A sizable amount and well over the minimum cost of the lowest bloodlines. The last thing I focused on was the skill. "Ah, hang 10, Austin shouted, repeating the same gesture as before, drawing me away from my musings. Refusing to reply in worry that it would egg him on, I withheld telling him that the phrase didn't mean high five. Hang 10 was a surfing term and didn't refer to the 10 fingers in a high five. Wait, that doesn't work either, he said, going back to the drawing board. I had passed the level 45 threshold and could now get my second-to-last class skill. I would only be able to get one more at level 50 for my current class, and I had 3 to choose from. For my level 35 profession skill, I picked up warding, uncommon. It boosted all aspects of creating and placing wards. What I did with the frost rune shouldn't really be considered a ward, but the skill worked on it all the same. The skill boosted the effectiveness, efficiency, and strength a ward could pull from the environment. It aided my ability to see the flows in the area around me while placing wards so that I could put them in the optimal spot. The reason I picked it was for a couple of different reasons. Wards were powerful things, and they were the first line of defense for any city. A city I planned on building. Creating powerful wards would only add to the defensive capabilities of my future city. Another reason was that wards were extremely versatile. They could be used for more than just defensive barriers. They could create environmental effects like my frost rune. They could contain energies both beneficial and harmful. Creating a warded room to contain ice mana would be the perfect atmosphere for me, and I could do the same with other affinities helping my family out. Containing harmful effects could be used for body refining and increasing resistance toward them. A poison mist contained with wards would be the best environment for training. Another use of wards was in detection. They could be used more subtly for detecting any intrusions and could alert me if there was anything happening that I should know about. Their use were endless, and it all really depended on the string of runes involved. Stringing runes together was something I still had to learn, but it would greatly boost their power. Using one giant rune to increase its effects was the least efficient way to go about doing what I had. Learning that made me cringe. But there was still so much I didn't know. That skill choice had been easy, this one not so much. The previous class skills were easy to pick. I didn't get to pick the level 25 skill, Frost Armor R. But I would have anyway, it was so good. Momentum of the Avalanche R. was a no-brainer and was a massive boon. Frozen Fortitude UN. was another great skill. Permafrost UN. was my response to the Blaze Lions and correcting a weakness. Now it was a decision. There were 3 new skills I desired along with an old one I wanted to get. Frost Armor R's counterpart, Frost Armory R. was a skill I didn't want to give up. Frozen Patchwork, rare. Stave off injuries with a patchwork of ice. The skill will not replace lost limbs but will cover bleeding cuts, replace torn muscles and broken bones, and stave off the effects of blood loss. Stay in the fight longer by freezing wounds and maintaining your body. Glacial Presence, rare. The colder it gets, the stronger you become. As the temperature decreases, all your stats grow in response. Any cold-related skills are more effective in sub-zero temperatures and cost less mana. Polar Plunge, uncommon. Channel your will and mana into the area around you, plunging the temperature to polar levels. Works directly on the mana and air in the surroundings, converting it into sub-zero temperatures. All 3 skills were great. Polar Plunge UN. was objectively the weakest of the bunch, but paired directly with Glacial Presence R. made it a great skill. Sure, Permafrost UN. and Hail C. both lowered the temperature in the area, but they both worked as byproducts. Hail C. created ice which lowered the temperature by a minuscule amount on any grand scale, and I had to pump a lot of mana into Permafrost UN. to get any huge effect out of it. Permafrost UN. lowered the temperature in the area and cooled it off, but wasn't the main effect of the skill. A skill directly tied to temperature would have way more effect for a lot less effort, which would ease the burden of other skills during a fight. But the effect wasn't that groundbreaking, and it was probably something I could learn to do myself. At least I thought I could. Getting Polar Plunge UN. without Glacial Presence R. was meaningless, but I didn't want to fill up my 2 last skill choices with them. Frozen Patchwork R. was too useful to pass up. The thing that decided it for me was what I needed right now. Both Polar Plunge UN. and Frost Armory R. weren't immediately crucial. Glacial Presence R. and Frozen Patchwork R. were. Strength or endurance. One would make me stronger while the other would let me fight through injuries. The words "all your stats" and Any cold-related skill sealed it for me. Glacial presence was better right now. Aha! Austin exclaimed before looking me dead in the eye, hand high in the air, palm out. Hang 9. Chapter 95 Skills. Austin and Abigail stayed for the cleanup, which made it significantly faster than if I were alone. The rune ran out of mana not long after I woke up, which made the ice start to melt and create a muddy mess. I had to throw all of it out of the camp before it created too much of a slurry. Walking around in the mud was no fun for anyone. We were lucky enough to get the bodies out before they thawed and started leaking everywhere. Cleaning up bodily fluids was the worst. Now that the wave was over, there were so many things I wanted to spend my time on. I wanted points to buy a bloodline. I wanted to upgrade my law before my evolution. Plus, I wanted to spend time upgrading some of my skills. All the ones sitting at common irked me. In the long list of things to do, my profession was lower on the list. It just wasn't as important right now. Being 3 levels away from a class evolution made it the center of my attention instead of my profession. I wanted to form my spirit anchor and go through the first step of body tempering to do as much as I could before evolving. I wanted to get the best class possible. I wasn't really under pressure to rush either. There was always the option of abandoning the camp and fighting it out down south where it would be safer. There was no existential crisis causing me to rush, and there was no need to hasten my evolution other than my vanity. I wasn't going to shoot myself in the foot just for a challenge I felt now. Fighting the waves alone wasn't necessary, and I wasn't going to alter my potential because of it. If it took a little extra time to evolve to get everything done, it was worth it. Even if I didn't evolve before the tutorial ended. Austin looked at me hopefully with the idea of going around to the nearby pylons to rack up some points. He still needed quite a lot for the bloodline he chose, and he hadn't gained much from the wave. He had filled me in on how it went, and it was funny to see him frustrated about it. The amount of people they had made it, so they split the points among a wider group of people during the waves, diminishing what everyone got. He was lucky I worked out a deal, so we didn't have to give them up like the rest of the camp. Well, we gave some up, but not more than we already did. Tracy's camp worked differently than ours, and she forced everyone to give up their points so she could upgrade the camp with them. She thought that was the better way to go. Where we only gave up half, they gave up all. It was one of the things I had to fight her on while we discussed our cooperation. I was under the thought process that we were helping her during the waves just as much as she was helping us. Giving her all of the points we got was out of the question. We stuck with the split we already had but gave it to her instead of using it on our own camp. It was easy to sell to my family because nothing changed for them. They still gave up half of their points the same as before. Austin got miffed out of points because he had to split his kills more ways, not because he had to give them up. The lowest tier bloodlines that cost the least were base animals without any affinity tied to them, like giant eagle or grizzly bear. There was a base model for all the known animals and some that were unknown. They started at the 900,000 to 1 million range, which I could already afford. There was an incline in price to match the strength of the animal. A mouse bloodline didn't come with the same price tag as a wolf one. An affinity added around 500,000 points to the base model, but it varied based on affinity. More common affinities like fire and earth cost less than rarer ones like solar and arctic. Anything with a solar affinity was still out of range for Austin, especially for the kind he was looking for. Upgrade potential also carried an increase in price tag. Some bloodlines didn't have a very high evolution potential and would be very hard to evolve in a meaningful way, while others had clear evolution potential. Like a squirrel bloodline versus a dragon. I had suggested getting a fire affinity one and evolving it into a solar one, like a flame hawk bloodline into a solar hawk, but he declined. He wanted to start big even if it took more work to do it. I agreed with the sentiment and planned to do the same. It would be a waste not to use the store we were given. We weren't told explicitly, but it was hinted that a grand store like the one we had wasn't a thing when we got back on Earth. It seemed like a tutorial exclusive to massively bombard us with information, gear, techniques, professions, and general knowledge we should have. Like a primer for when we got back. Almost as if it were a tutorial. I wanted to gain points just as much as him, but I couldn't forget the threat lurking out there. Giving the man time to build up forces sounded like a recipe for disaster. We argued about it for a minute before we hashed out a plan. We would hit all of the pylons on the way to the next camp the Mindbreaker held. A compromise of sorts. Austin wanted to focus on points while I wanted revenge. Abigail cautioned restraint, but even she didn't put her all into trying to convince us. She wanted payback just as much as I did. Out of the things I could spend time on, I felt that points were the most important right now. There was no telling if we would be able to buy bloodlines when we got back, and that was the deciding factor. I could always upgrade my law and all the other paths of power later. Bloodlines were easiest to acquire now, and there was no guarantee that availability would stay after the tutorial. Before Austin and I took off, I had a task for Abigail. "Can you take that to Sam?" I said, pointing at the bear with my hammer still in it. "I want her to make it into something for me. It was a good fight and a worthy foe. How am I going to carry it? It has to weigh over 2,000 pounds. She said incredulously with wide eyes, looking the massive thing over. I hadn't thought of that. I don't know. Gut it or something, I don't need the meat. Maybe bring Sam to it instead of the other way around." I answered, "I believe in you. You'll figure it out." She started fussing over it, walking around the giant carcass and muttering out some ideas. Well, she's got it in hand. Abigail would take care of it and I was free to leave. Took a few hours to get back in fighting shape from Abigail's healing, and the wave itself took 3 hours. We wouldn't surprise anyone when we attacked now, as it was almost 8 o'clock at night and it would take even more time before we got there. The part of me that wanted to rest looked at the timer ticking down with only 16 days left and promptly quieted down. 16 days wasn't a lot of time and I needed to spend them well. Austin and I fell into pace traveling and fighting. A pylon took a few hours to fight and conquer before we moved on to the next. Each had a different amount of beasts with them depending on which wave they originally fell, but all held a large sum of monsters. And a large sum of points. We spent a few hours at 3 different pylons before we made it to one of the Mindbreakers' camps. I still thought that was a stupid name. During the fights, I focused on my skills. Fighting was when I did my best thinking in terms of upgrading them, and I tried to use that as fuel. Having the pressure released and the freedom I felt while fighting the wave made me forget to focus on upgrading one of them. Upgrading my skills was on my long list of things to do, and nothing said I couldn't do 2 at once. One already upgraded, and I had missed the notification in the sea of kill confirmations. You have upgraded a skill. Heavy Armor Proficiency. Novice. Heavy Armor Proficiency. Apprentice. It had come at some point during the fighting and I had no clue when. The next time I made my armor, I would have to change to accommodate the new skill. It was a good change, but still a little annoying. Gaining points and upgrading skills. That was the goal. The first one I focused on was Throwing Proficiency, N. It sounded dumb to focus on that one first, but it was one I had gotten a lot of insight into. I had run all over the place hurling spears of ice at things to keep my boost, and it made me feel close to upgrading it. I was right, for it upgraded at the first pylon we fought. All it took was some dedicated time using it. Austin grumbled about having to work more while I focused on the skill, but he was just being lazy. You have upgraded a skill. Throwing Proficiency, Novice, Throwing Proficiency, Apprentice. After that, I turned to the skill I had the longest. Heavy Blow, Un. It was a great skill, but one I hadn't really pushed to the limit. I had upgraded Power Strike, C. By pushing both myself and the skill past the limit in desperation to win. This time was harder. I couldn't just push more mana into the skill like I did last time. It took both mana and stamina to work, and overloading it with one didn't upgrade it. Looking back, I felt it was close to upgrading it during the fight with the bear boss, but I focused on Shatter Un. At the time instead. I fixed that now. During the upgrade, I had a chance to alter the skill somewhat and turn it away from what it used to be, but I refrained from doing so. I liked Heavy Blow Un, and it was a great general skill to use while fighting. It added to the strength of my swings and could be amplified with other effects by other skills, like Frostbite Un. The only thing I needed was more of what it already did. You have upgraded a skill. Heavy Blow, Uncommon, Mighty Blow, Rare. I guess since the function stayed the same, the name didn't change much. The upgrade came while fighting one of the bosses of the fallen pylons, and it took compressing my mana and stamina together with a little intent to upgrade. I couldn't just wing it by throwing things together and hoping for the best like when I upgraded it to uncommon. The upgrade came after hours of fighting and on the last boss before we fought a camp again. I almost gave up on it to focus on something else when it finally clicked. I had been trying to just shove more mana and stamina into it to no avail and took some brainstorming with Austin to figure it out. The one skill I really wanted to upgrade next was Hail, C. But I had a plan for that one, and I didn't have all the pieces yet. Ice Manipulation just upgraded and would take a lot of time to reach rare, so I skipped over that one. My already rare skills were too complex and I had no idea where to start. Frost Armor R and Momentum R were both great skills, but I had no idea how to upgrade them. Throwing my Law at Frost Armor R didn't do anything, and neither did trying to compress it down with Ice Manipulation on. Both rare skills were beyond me right now. We found the Mindbreaker's camp right where Tracy told us, and it looked more fortified than the last one. More people and beasts were milling around in it, and some makeshift fortifications were made. It looked like a shoddy attempt to deter another attack. Didn't. Austin and I used the same strategy as before, and it worked like a charm. It made me assume he couldn't see through his thralls because it was only slightly more difficult to take down than the one before. If he could see what we did, he would have come up with a better way to defend against it. Honestly, I was surprised he let us do it again. A part of me thought he would pull all his army back to a few camps to concentrate his forces. I didn't know if he was underestimating us or if he thought the attack was a one-time thing, but he was in for a rude awakening if he thought that. He attacked my family. There was no escaping my justice. There was one last skill I focused on, and it was unsuccessful. The last skill I attempted to upgrade came when we were slaughtering our way through the thralls and was an idea I had thought up a while ago. Sweeping Slash, C, wasn't very useful anymore, and I had spent some time thinking about how to influence the skill into something I could use. My answer was my snowflakes of death. They were sweeping around me in arcs, and they did slash things. All I had to do was have the skill activate on them instead of my weapon. It was surprisingly hard. The skill did not want to go anywhere else except for my weapon. It took a lot of fighting just to get it to change, and when it finally did, it wasn't what I wanted. It worked on my body instead of my weapon. It got to the point where I had to give up on it. The skill was too rooted in being used on a weapon to be useful anywhere else. I would still keep it, but it would only be helpful in specific circumstances. Fighting the 3 pylons and the camp after took 8 hours. Austin and I didn't get back to our camp until almost 4 in the morning. It was well worth it though, and looking at my point total was the only justification I needed. Points: 1,865,223. If we could earn points that fast, we would get a bloodline in no time. Chapter 96, Austin's Bloodline. The Mindbreaker. Shit. All of it had gone to shit. Everything was fine until that one piece of shit chased him halfway across the tutorial. His plan was working, and he was mowing through everything in his way until that one camp. He had thought it was going to be easy. They didn't even have a lot of people either. He had conquered camps with double their number, and he had done so easily. But they were different. Their skills decimated his army, and the one of stone made it so his superior numbers couldn't be used effectively. He couldn't blow through the gate and swarm them from inside. His plan worked perfectly all up until the last one holding the gate. The monsters with the explosives went and died in the perfect spot. The explosion blew the gate away like it had with all the others. The only thing he had to do was breach the gate with his army, and it would have been fine. But no. The man with glowing shields held it off for nearly an hour. Just thinking about it made him grit his teeth in anger. The 2 strongest people had left, but another monster was in their camp. He held off droves of thralls Craig sent at the wall, and it seemed he could have held on for a while more. Fire ravaged most of his army, but that wouldn't have been a problem if they had broken through. The fire mage wouldn't have been able to hold off nearly as many if she was surrounded. She would have fallen to the pressure of being overwhelmed like all the rest had. He even went personally to control the army after it didn't break through initially. He was as close to the battle as he ever had, and they still lost. Numbers had always worked before, and this was the first time that it hadn't. It was vexing in a way that made him want to explode in anger. His army was so large now it was hard to keep control of all of them with his skills, and he stopped leveling up a while ago. He sat perpetually at level 50 without any hope of getting any higher. It only added to his growing frustrations. He did everything he could to level up, but it just wouldn't happen. He killed monsters and men alike in the hopes it would work. He personally slaughtered his own army trying to level up to no avail. At first, he thought it was a bloodline issue. He had seen the option to buy them from the store but didn't waste the points on them. They were extremely expensive and there was no need for them. He wasn't fighting personally. After stalling at level 50, he reconsidered. If humans were too weak to evolve, he would gain the bloodline of something that could. He used a lot of points on a suitable one and it boosted his abilities tremendously, but didn't let him level. He was still stuck at 50. With no way to level, Craig funneled all of the points his thralls brought into his camp. The fewer monsters he had to leave behind to defend it, the more he could have out conquering pylons. He went around to all the other camps and brought death through the rest of the tutorial. The only camps left were the ones he couldn't beat. His camp was the most upgraded he had seen in the tutorial. Massive stone walls ran along the edge of his camp in a circle, over 25 feet in the air. Battlements ran along the top, providing cover from ranged attacks, and the gate had kill holes for anything too close. It was a marvel of magic and engineering. He had spent a massive amount of points on it. From the 9 pylons he used to have, he funneled all of the points into one camp. After the waves, the armies defending other pylons would march back here to give up their points. All until only 8 arrived one day. One of his camps had fallen. At the time, he didn't think much of it. He couldn't feel the connections he instilled in his thralls, so he couldn't keep track of them instantaneously and had assumed they fell to the wave. The camp that fell wasn't that strong to begin with. He conquered it from some jackass who thought he was some god. Kept saying this was his chance to rise above others and grasp his destiny. He now ambled along with the others of his camp, doing what Craig told him to do. So much for destiny. After the camp failed to bring back his points, he went to investigate. He didn't like wasting time on things like this, but he wanted to confirm what he already knew. After reaching the camp, a different scene revealed itself. It didn't fall to the monsters, but to men. It was clearly an attack raised against the camp and not the monsters. There were no monsters left over from the battle around the pylon to signify it falling. The bodies weren't eaten and the place was looted. It was clear what happened and he knew who did it too. Evidence of ice and frost still littered the area. It was the same bastard that chased him for over 4 hours. He had to run all the way back to his capital after the failed attack, wasting a significant amount of time. After seeing who his camp fell to, he had to reevaluate his plan. There were 5 waves left and they would only get stronger. From his scouting reports, there were only 3 camps left. The obnoxious trapper in the jungle, the man of ice in the north, and the desert coalition in the south. All 3 had held out for the 73 days the tutorial had gone on. It was more like 2 camps now that the northern one merged with the trapper. The rest were gone, either swallowed by monsters, joined him in his mission, or abandoned to join one of the others. All the other camps fell. There were no more camps to conquer. No more revenge to have. The only camps left were too strong for him to beat. They had massive amounts of warriors and walls nearly as good as his. They both saw the threat of the tutorial for what it was early on and took massive steps to survive. Both had taken firm hold of the points earned and fed them into defenses, and that was one of the only reasons they were still alive. All other camps that tried other methods fell. Except for one, but they gave up. If they had stayed, they would have died like all the rest. 2 camps. 2 more and his quest would be complete. There was no need to keep his army stationed everywhere else. He would pull them all back here to his capital. There were still strings he could pull on and things he could do, but he would save those for later when their use would be most effective. He would wait them out and attack after the last wave. When they were weakest and when they thought it was over. He had to go around to all the pylons he owned personally to retrieve his army stationed there, but it was worth it. His steadfast castle would be bursting at the seams with his army, and he would wait out the pitiful humans who remained. All to finish his mission. Chris. Point of view. Day 75. Austin and I spent every waking moment fighting and doing battle, all in the attempt to gain points. After the first day of fighting pylons, something unsettling happened. The fallen pylons on their way were all normal except for when they reached the first camp that should have held thralls. They were gone. The whole camp had been abandoned. No people, monsters, or anything in between. It was a ghost town. It frustrated me to no end. I wanted to whittle down the camps until killing the man responsible, but my plans had been dashed. All it took was flagging down one of the birds perpetually following us to get a response. The Beastmaster could see through the eyes of the birds, or so I was told, and I wrote down my question. The Beast Lady read it and gave her answer to Abigail, who had returned down south after healing me, and she messaged me with the answer. I wasn't sure if there was a character limit on her skill, but all of her messages were short and to the point. Abandoned camps. Concentrated on one. All but his capital are gone. It was not good news. The so-called capital was the strongest camp he had, and it wasn't something they could smash through. We could do that to the weak camps because their walls and gates were weak. The scouting report on the camp in question told them the last camp was anything but weak. I wouldn't be able to kill the man if he stayed in his capital. The thought of being unable to do anything rankled me. I wanted to kill him to be done with the looming threat, but I couldn't. Tracy outright refused to help attack it, and the only help I could get was from my family. The camp gave me a bad feeling, and something told me ignoring it was a problem. I wanted it dealt with, and soon. Leaving the problem to fester was a recipe for disaster. I wanted it gone. Is that enough for you? I asked out of breath. It was late into the night, and there would be a wave tomorrow. I wanted to go home and rest, but Austin asked for one more pylon. After finding out my foe turtled up, Austin and I turned to the fallen pylons for points. We went through them as fast as we could, mercilessly slaughtering monsters for hours at a time. In the 3 days we had been fighting, we had racked up quite the sum. We could fight 4 pylons a day depending on how strong they were. Any more and we risked serious injury. My stamina was bottomed out, and so was my mana by the 4th. My endurance was high, but hours of fighting took their toll. I also ran into the problem of keeping my boost from Avalanche R for too long. My body was strong, but sustaining a 100% boost for more than a few hours started to strain it in more ways than one. Each pylon gave anywhere from 150k to 200k points, and we were getting almost 1 million a day. For 3 days we did this. Day 73 after the wave, day 74, and today, day 75. I was tired. We spent nearly every waking moment fighting or resting so we could fight again. My body was spent, and so was my mind. Controlling ice wasn't effortless. The thought of turning on the rune and a good night's rest was the only thing keeping me going. The cold would wash all the exhaustion away and get me ready for the wave tomorrow. I wanted to take today off, but Austin said he was so close, so I acquiesced for another pylon. One last one for the day. Yep, I can finally get it. Even as tired as I knew he was, excitement pepped him up. Good, because I'm going to sleep. We had stayed at our camp, rather than Tracy's, and it was a good trek away. My bed was calling me. After getting back and turning the rune on, my eyes closed as soon as I laid down. Austin complained about the cold, but I didn't care. I spent all day helping him. He could deal with a little cold. Points. 4,023,923. Seeing the total the next morning made it all worth it. We had to spend a generous amount on healing potions and stamina potions to keep up our pace, but even I couldn't continue at the pace we were going. I was close to the one I wanted myself. Austin was acting like a kid on Christmas morning when we woke up. He had everything he needed to evolve. He didn't care about grinding every possible advantage out as he could, and the only thing he was waiting on was his bloodline. He had enough points to finally buy it. He planned on getting used to it for a few days, then evolving when he got enough points for the material needed. Tracy's camp was a higher level than ours, and it had more options revealed than ours. It had more higher-tiered options for bloodlines than ours did, and it made me finally make a decision. I picked one that I thought would be best. It was strong, had an Arctic affinity, and could evolve into something great. It was the whole package. The cost was over 5 million, but it was well worth it in my opinion, and I would be getting it soon. The wave today should put me most of the way there. Austin's choice was 3.8 million, and he just got enough from the last pylon. Even seeing the new options Tracy's camp had, he stuck with his original choice. Since our pylon was high enough level to buy it, he wasted no time in doing so. Too excited to run down for Jonathan to buy it. He was near maxed on his profession anyway. My 5 million purchase should push him the rest of the way. He had been making a killing facilitating the trade between our camp and Tracy's in terms of experience. His profession was higher level than his class at this point. Austin didn't waste 2 seconds after waking up before rushing to the pylon. I had barely been able to convince him to wait for morning last night. Not knowing what to expect, I just sat and watched. Austin went over and rested his hand on the pylon for a bit before a vial appeared in his hand. The vial held a radiant golden liquid that shone with an inner light. It wasn't blindingly bright, but subtle in its luminescence. I already knew which one he picked but threw an identify at it anyway. Bloodline essence of the Golden Sun Eagle. It was a higher tier bloodline and the one that Austin wanted. He was fixated on bird bloodlines in hopes of eventually evolving it into some kind of phoenix. There were hosts of solar affinity bloodlines he skipped over to focus on birds. Radiant lions, sun leopards, solar wolves. It would give him a boost to his solar affinity, his agility, and perception. At least that was what the description said in the store. What it would really do when called upon it was still unknown. Austin wasted no time and gulped the whole thing down. After swallowing, his whole body began to light up and he even started to melt the ice around him. Steam wafted off of his body as the light intensified before it vanished as suddenly as it came. I looked at him expectantly and he only had a stupid grin on his face. "Well?" I asked. "It's perfect. What does it feel like?" It hurt a bit at first, but it wasn't anything too bad. It settled over my entire body like a warm glove. It was like basking in the intense sun for too long. Not entirely painful, but not entirely pleasant. He started to hop around testing his arms and legs to feel the difference before looking back up at me. "Wanna test it?" I most certainly did. Our fight was tame, but we still pushed ourselves a little. I had to be ready for the wave and Austin was still getting used to it. He said that it made him faster and more precise with his spear and I could attest to that. His stabs took on a new form from the boost. He could see openings and weaknesses better and his eyes could see and evaluate the fight better. When he called on it, his body began to glow and the boosts got even stronger. The bird of prey was a good choice and he became even more deadly because of it. With the boost from both perception and agility, he could perceive openings and exploit them with lethal efficiency. It was startling to fight against. If he got that much stronger from his, what would mine do? Chapter 97, Make Me. I stood in the wreckage of the wave's aftermath and couldn't help but grimace. Seated on the fallen boss's corpse, my body worked to seal up the parts of it that were missing and leaking blood onto the floor. My hammer was lost somewhere among the bodies, discarded after the fight. Empty glass bottles clinked together at my feet with only a hint of red liquid still in them. Missing chunks of my body slowly grew back and healed over. A massive wound on my side was still leaking blood from where the boss's mandibles ripped a chunk out. I wouldn't have guessed ants to be this strong. When they first spawned in, I thought it was going to be an easy wave. Boy, was I wrong. While the wave wasn't hard, the ants were deceptively strong. If I were still the same level as when I fought the bears, it would have been a much harder fight. All the fighting with Austin had the bonus of leveling me up. My new levels and skill were what made it manageable, if only barely. This wave was easier than the last, but I was more injured leaving the fight. I had reached level 50 before the wave even started and had 2 new skills to use. If I hadn't had them, I would most likely be dead. Glacial Presence made everything cold-related stronger. My armor was stronger, my skills were stronger, and my body was stronger. My mana flowed easier and lasted longer than before. Skills cost less and my law came a tad easier and lasted longer. I was pretty sure that was for 2 reasons. One being Glacial Presence and the second from pushing it so hard the last wave. Just like muscles, mental strain grew easier with practice. Pushing my law so hard last wave made it last longer, and the same would be true for the next wave. The only reason I was still standing was because of the new skill I took at level 50. Frozen Patchwork R. Held my body together even with chunks of it missing. The ants had a metal affinity that made their mandibles damn near indestructible. They clamped down hard and tore me apart even through my armor. It was a fight to remember. How I was still standing was a mystery even to me. 2 skills upgraded during the fight. You have upgraded a skill. Heavy Weapon Proficiency. Apprentice. Dash. Heavy Weapon Proficiency. Journeyman. Meditation. Common. Dash. Cold Meditation. Uncommon. My usual tactic of smashing everything with my hammer didn't work as well for this wave. The ants had thick metal exoskeletons that were resistant to blunt damage. When I hit them, it was like they were walking ingots of metal in ant form. They made me refine my skills with the hammer and do more than just use overwhelming strength. I could still smash them, but I couldn't obliterate them in one swing like I was used to. That was the main reason there were so many injuries I sustained. I had to actually use the hammer with a degree of skill that I hadn't been pushed to do before. It was nice to feel that kind of pressure again. It made me adjust how I wielded the weapon, and it was satisfying to see the improvement. I was a long way from the beginner I started as. The other skill that upgraded was meditation. That one came after the fact and was when I was recuperating from the wave. The healing potions worked to fix me up, and I used meditation C to speed it up. On a whim, I used Glacial Presence R as well and tried to push the two together. If Glacial Presence R made everything stronger when it was colder, meditation C, a rejuvenation skill, could use that to work better in the cold. It worked. Now the skill had increased efficiency the colder it was around me. It was a perfect upgrade to my recovery skill. It boosted my vitality and my mana regeneration a significant amount in the icy landscape the camp had become. The amount of points I got was another boon. Nearly 700k from the wave alone. I was now closer to my bloodline, and it would only be another day until I had enough to get it. I had plans riding on the next few days, and I wanted to get them rolling soon. I didn't want to keep fighting all the time for points. There were people who needed to die. With the 2 days I had until the next wave, I had planned what to do about the Mindbreaker. My instincts kept telling me not to leave him be, and I trusted them. He was a threat I didn't want looming over me. Convincing my family to help me attack him wasn't even that hard. They all knew what needed to be done, and they would be marching up to help. All of them would be coming up here to help me after they were finished with the wave down south. They had prepared to assault his camp, and we would be doing it soon. I wanted to be as strong as possible in case something went wrong, and that was where my bloodline came in. Austin received a large boost in power from his, and I wanted the same. He had most likely evolved into Erank by now, but I would not. That was the only downside from the wave. All the experience was wasted. I was already maxed out for the tier, and I had no plans of evolving. I would stay here until I was ready. Pulling up my status showed. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, F, Human. Class, F, Champion of Niflheim. Rare, Level 50. Profession, F, Runic Blacksmith. Uncommon, Level 35. Affinity, Ice. Faction, Zelensky Family. Temporary, Faction Head. Strength, 398. Agility, 203. Perception, 96. Fortitude, 344. Endurance, 162. Vitality, 135. Intelligence, 67. Wisdom, 150. Acumen, 56. Free points, 0. Laws, least law of ice. Class skills, boiler. Profession skills, boiler. Coins, 0. Points, 4,823,923. My stats wouldn't change much until I completed what I needed to before evolving. I put all of my free points from levels I received in the last couple of days into Vitality to bring it up. If I used Frozen Patchwork R for anything serious and continued to fight on, I needed to be able to heal afterward or have a healer ready for when the skill dropped. I couldn't keep it active indefinitely, and I needed a plan for when my body unfroze. The injuries were still there, only iced over momentarily. If there was anything serious I could still die, it would only be delayed. Increasing my vitality was my plan to stop that, along with the recent meditation upgrade. With my evolution on the horizon, I created a list to keep track of the things I needed to do before I evolved. 1. Form my spirit anchor. 2. Get a body of wood. 3. Upgrade my law to lesser. Those were the 3 things I wanted to do before I evolved. There was supposedly another path of power I was missing, but I had no idea what to do about that. I couldn't wait around forever in the hopes I might eventually find out. I would have to make do with those 3 for now. I spent the next few hours in cold meditation, taking a health potion when the last wore off. You couldn't take them too fast or your body would reject the healing or something like that. Abigail cautioned me on their use, but I hadn't particularly cared about the why at the time. All I needed to know was what the cooldown was, not why there was a cooldown. I would have to ask her again. My family wasn't due to come up until tomorrow, so that gave me the rest of the day to get enough points for my bloodline. I would have to travel down to Tracy's pylon to buy it, but that wasn't that big of a deal. It would allow me to help carry things back and make sure all the preparations for battle were ready. Abigail would make sure everything was prepped, and I had no doubt she was fussing over things right now. But checking myself wouldn't hurt. After hitting level 50 and my new skills, fighting the pylons was laughably easy. Even easier than fighting with Austin the other day. I would flood the area with permafrost and hail, then glacial presence would activate. After that, I started marching to the center. Momentum of the avalanche would build up and the boss would die to a few mighty blows. My fighting style was down to a science by now. Even the rare time I got an injury, frozen patchwork fixed it up enough for me to ignore it until after the fight when I could pop a healing potion. The points I needed were easy to acquire after that. I was able to go to sleep well in time to get some quality rest with a satisfied smile on my face. I finally had enough for the purchase. The run down south didn't take long and I was soon looking over Tracy's camp. She had taken in a few more people after us and it was even more crowded than before. A few of the camps that were still independent had fallen and she ended up picking up the stragglers. They were able to hold their own in a fight and would help during the waves. All of the weak had died off already. From the snippets of information I had gotten from Abigail, Tracy had one of the last camps left. All the others had fallen. Tracy's, the Mindbreakers, mine, and one more down south were all that were left. I didn't really consider ours a camp though, it was only me that stayed. Tracy was in contact with the camp down south and I was pretty sure they were going to work something out like they had for us. The amount of people in the tutorial that would make it to the E rank compared to the monsters of the last wave wasn't high. There would be hundreds of E rank monsters to contend with and not enough people to fight them. That was odd to me. I had noticed the difference with what other people were able to do and what I was able to do before, and that was another thing that stuck out. I didn't really have a sense for what normal was. Normal was the average capability my family members had that I had fought with. Learning that they were some of the strongest was a surprise. Learning I was the strongest even more so. Tracy didn't have all the information, but from what she did have, I was at the top. The only person that she thought came close, outside my own family, was the man down south. People were insanely worried about the final wave and I could feel the tension in the air just a few feet into Tracy's camp. We were 77 days into a 90-day tutorial and all we had left was the home stretch. For waves, every wave closer to the end had people fretting more. From talks that I had relayed to me, I didn't want to remain out of the loop anymore. People were coming together to do everything they could to survive. The camp down south juggled people around to different camps to stay ahead of the penalty of having more people. They survived the waves by making sure that all non-combatants were outside the camp when the wave hit. It was a risky move that I didn't know I would have taken. If the camp fell, the people were screwed. Plus, they needed to leave fighters with them to help defend them from the roaming beasts while they were in the wild waiting out the wave. It wasn't a sustainable solution though, and the only reason they were able to do it was because they regularly cleared the nearby pylons and area of monsters. Without culling all nearby monsters constantly, it would have failed. It became an ever-increasing time sink during their days off to keep everything clear so the non-combatants wouldn't be in danger while the warriors were fighting off the wave. From Tracy's intel, they used to have numerous pylons, but they had slowly been whittled down to one. Focusing on more than one was a waste. At first, when I heard of people owning multiple pylons, it confused me. Why would someone want to own more than one when defending was so hard? It became clear after thinking about the points they would rake in. The more pylons one held, the more points they would earn every wave. If you had the people to defend them, owning pylons was the fastest way to gain points. Plus, the bonus at the end of the wave was boosted from them. Every wave there was reward for successfully defending a pylon, and that bonus was multiplied by the number of pylons a faction held. The bonus for the 27th wave was over 17,000 points. If our faction had 2 pylons, that would be over 34,000 points. The motive was clear. After finding out that the leader down south was close to me in strength, I asked Tracy for all the information she had on him. I wanted to find out what he was like and if he was similar to me or not. Sadly, she only had sparse information on the guy. They had only corresponded a few times, and the Beast Lady's birds didn't do well in the desert. Apparently, he was the first to discover the body-refining method of using poison and skyrocketed in strength from there, using that boost in body to his advantage. Well, he used venom, but same difference. He had a powerful body and used a shield and sword during battle. His affinity wasn't known, and neither was his level. It was approximated to be near the cap of F rank and maybe into the E rank. She did have a name though, Kurt Lockwood. Hearing about Kurt made me think of fighting him. He sounded like a worthy foe. I trusted in Tracy's decision to see if the man was open to merging together, but I wasn't holding out hope. Basing any decisions on hope was asking to be let down. He either would or wouldn't, and I needed to be prepared for both outcomes. After walking into Tracy's camp, I couldn't help but pick up my pace toward where Jonathan was so I could finally make my purchase. I didn't have to go through him, but it was stupid not to. He would gain experience from the purchase, and he usually got a discount on items from the store. He didn't get one this time, though. Bloodlines weren't able to be discounted. He had looked into it when we first considered them and thought about buying them. I wasn't sure why, but he didn't get any discount on them. It was why Austin bought his directly without going through a merchant. They missed out on some experience, but my giant purchase would cap him anyway. He wasn't far from level 50 and would get there after today. Everything we bought went through him, and we spent a lot of points. "Jonathan," I said, walking up to him. He looked up from what he was doing and must have noted my eagerness. "Is it time?" he asked. Austin hadn't exactly been subtle with his purchase, which made it easy to guess what I was here for. "Yes." Jonathan just shook his head and sighed. "Like you need to get any stronger." He got up and started heading toward the pylon before adding, "And here I thought getting my spirit anchor would close the gap somewhat." I decided not to answer him. I didn't know what to say, really. It wasn't like I was doing it on purpose. It didn't take long to reach the pylon, and we were let through. Tracy had weird restrictions on it and had put a guard outside to keep people from using it. We were let in without resistance. When Abigail and I negotiated our merging, I made it clear that we were not to be barred from the pylon. "Are you sure about this?" Jonathan asked with a hint of concern on his face. It was a lot of points I was spending, and I wouldn't be getting them back if I didn't like it. "I am," I said as I transferred him the points. His eyes went wide as the numbers ticked over and only sighed ruefully. He touched the pylon, and a few seconds later a small vial appeared in his hand. We stared at the small treasure, both thinking the same thing. So small, and it had cost so many points. The vial in his hand cost more points than we had spent on our camp for the entirety of the tutorial. With a small amount of trepidation, he handed over the extremely expensive vial. It wasn't even the red color blood usually had. Austin's bloodline vial was a golden color, but mine was something else. It had hues of blue in it that pushed it closer to purple than to red. It felt like a trick of the eyes, but I would have sworn it glowed an icy blue for a second when Jonathan handed it over. Frost started to coalesce on the surface of the glass, drawing in the moisture of the air. Taking it in my hand made it feel real, like it was all a dream before, but now that I had it, physically had it, made it real. It was cold to the touch, which wasn't surprising. It was an Arctic bloodline. I used a quick identify just because. Bloodline essence of the Frostborn. Frostborn was the first step on the Frost Giant bloodline. Just like Frost Wyrm evolved into Frost Dragon, Frostborn evolved into Frost Giant. It wasn't even the lowest tier either. Frost Touched was lower, but I saved up to buy the better one. Frostborn gave an increase in strength, fortitude, endurance, and all ice-related powers. It was the perfect package. The only issue was that it was frowned upon to use enlightened race bloodlines. Titan races and giant races didn't like others using their bloodline along with all the other enlightened races like elves and dwarves. It was a con I was willing to deal with. It was the best bloodline for me and I would use it. I didn't care all that much about the consequences. If they had a problem with it, I would deal with it then. If they wanted me to get rid of it, my response was already prepared. Make me. Chapter 98 Frostborn. I wasted no time and gulped the rich purple liquid down. Holding it for too long made me nervous for some reason, like it would disappear if I stared at it for too long. Austin had said he felt like a warm glove slid over him and like staying in the sun for too long. Mine felt nothing like that. It felt like super chilled liquid going down my throat that sapped all the body heat out of me. It almost felt like my throat was frozen as the liquid passed through it, like I was drinking liquid nitrogen. The chill started to spread throughout my body and my breath fogged as it exited my mouth even in the jungle heat around me. The essence worked its way through my body and I could feel it seep into my bones, into my muscles and skin. Its chill pervading throughout my body. It wormed through every inch, saturating my entire body in its cold touch. It felt painful at first but became comforting as the sensations continued. Like I had played in the snow for too long and had a bone-deep chill. I understood now why Austin had said it felt like staying in the sun for too long. The process had a pleasantness to it that edged the line of painful, towing between the two as the effect persisted. As the chill of my body subsided, I felt the strength that was left behind. It was invigorating in a way I had never experienced before. My body felt refreshed and stronger than ever. My muscles denser and my bones sturdier. Now all that was left to do was test it. I looked expectantly at Jonathan and he just sighed. "All right, let me get my shields," he said defeatedly. He didn't like fighting with me because he said I hit like a bus. Even the blows I held back on rattled his arms uncomfortably. We took a few steps outside the gate and we were ready. We stood across from each other, waiting for the other to make the first move. Jonathan wasted no time and already had his shields glowing with his spirit anchor. It would seem he wasn't taking this lightly. Austin had described the feeling of calling upon his bloodline to me before, but it wasn't that hard to figure out. It was almost instinctual after imbibing the liquid. I called on the power residing in my body and I felt it build up within me. The strength and fortitude boost felt stronger and almost doubled in power from their dormant state. I couldn't tell, but my skin turned a tad paler and my hair, which was a sandy blonde like most of my family, turned a bit whiter at the tips. My eyes turned from the usual green to a piercing blue that had a hidden glow behind them. The transformation was quick and it flowed through me much the same as when I first drank the bloodline essence. My body heat vanished and a chill emanated out from my body. Some of the moisture of the jungle around us started to condense and fog around my skin. "Whoa there, bud," Jonathan said a little shocked. "You look different." His words brought me out of my introspection, and I couldn't help but ask, "Do I glow?" "What?" "Oh, not really. Just your eyes." Jonathan stammered a bit at the question. "I wouldn't say they glow, but they are a bright, icy blue that I feel a chill wash over me when I look into them." Phew. As long as I didn't glow. I had been making fun of Austin for so long with numerous jokes about his glowing tendencies, and I was not looking forward to him returning the favor if I started doing it myself. Twirling my hammer, "Let's see what it does." Jonathan clanged his shields together in response and our fight started. With my bloodline activated, it felt a little like having momentum of the avalanche, or Barbarian's Fury, running. The only difference was my stats stayed the same. My status screen showed no visible changes from the activation, but I certainly felt stronger. My swings held more power than before and rifled through the air faster. My hammer felt easier to swing as well, the ice in the weapon more comfortable in my hands. The boost also didn't have the strain associated with my other two boosting skills. My body didn't feel like it was being pushed beyond its limit, but like it could now operate at a higher level. It was a base increase that didn't have the consequences the other two did. If I fought for too long with Avalanche or Fury on, I tired quickly and felt a bone-deep exhaustion afterward, like my body had been put through the ringer. Activating my bloodline didn't feel like that. The power wasn't fueled by my body, but the essence of the blood. And in doing so was finite. I knew from both Austin and information from the store, we couldn't call upon our bloodlines for indefinite amounts of time. The boost would run out if used for too long and would take time to recharge. Now I felt why. There was only so much power the blood held, and it would run out before long. The boost from the dormant state didn't take any power, but calling upon it did, and I could feel the amount gradually becoming smaller. There were ways to mitigate this, though. A beast could take in mana and essence to both purify and strengthen their bloodline, and we could do the same after assimilating them. We could funnel energy into our bloodline for two effects. One was we could make it stronger and give a bigger boost. The maximum strength was based on the innate power of the bloodline, which was the reason higher-graded bloodlines were better. They started at a higher peak and could be raised much higher than lower-graded ones. The second thing we could do was increase the amount of power the bloodline had. Increasing the amount of bloodline essence we had dormant inside of us so we could call upon it for longer. There were two ways to strengthen a bloodline, and then there was purifying it. Purifying a bloodline led to evolving it into a higher grade and was a qualitative change in the bloodline. Usually, the two processes went hand in hand. Beasts would strengthen their bloodline as much as possible before trying to purify it and evolve. The stronger their bloodline was, the higher chance of success they had when evolving. Some beasts didn't do this, but the norm was to strengthen first and then evolve. Seeing how failing to evolve a bloodline had the chance of death or extreme bodily injury, I wasn't going to rush it and plan to stick to the norm. After testing out the strength boost, I had Jonathan hit me a few times to test the fortitude boost. It was much the same as the strength, and the blows felt lighter than normal, and I could take a heavier blow before stumbling. All around, it felt like a decent 15 to 20% increase in my already monstrous stats, without the usual consequences of a boosting skill as well. The last thing I wanted to test was the effect it had on my skills. It said it boosted ice-related powers, and I wanted to see how much. I created some ice to use and started going through a few training exercises with ice manipulation. The effect was immediate. The ice flowed easier and was a lot easier to control. It felt like a weight had been removed from the skill, and it came easier than before. If I was once using oven mitts before, now it was like winter gloves instead. The skill was still only uncommon, but the boost was noticeable. And it worked on every ice skill I had, which was most of my skills. I may have gotten a bit carried away in my testing. The area of jungle we were in was a jungle no longer. It looked like someone took a piece of the North Pole and transplanted it here after I was done. At the end of it all, I was extremely satisfied. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I couldn't wait to test it out in battle. A battle that would be coming soon. With my purchase made, I went to make sure everything was ready for our trip and that all the preparations for the journey were made. Abigail had it mostly in hand, but I wanted to double-check. Everyone was packed and ready not long after, and there were only a few things left I needed to do. One of them was to try one more time to convince Tracy to join us. I found her in her office, where the mana density was notably higher and the woman was fretting over the papers on her desk. She was rubbing her temples in frustration about something that was written on them. Not wanting to intrude, I knocked at the open doorway. She looked up quickly and said, "Christopher, did you need something?" With the conversation started, I moved into the office and took a seat across from her desk. Her face didn't show any outward expression, but it tensed as I sat without an invitation. "Your help would be greatly appreciated for what we are about to do. We would have an easier time if we worked together." I didn't strictly need her help, but it would make everything easier. Another warrior would always be appreciated. We've had this conversation before. My skills aren't suited to attacking. They focus on defense. I don't know how much help I will be. She sighed. I can send Kathy and Damien with you though, and a few others. Both of them have expressed their desire to join you. Damien's lightning powers work well on the thralls and Kathy can help with scouting. It would be a shame if he managed to sneak away, she said. My mouth opened to try to persuade her, but she raised her hand to continue. I know what you are going to say. He's a threat. I understand that. But why are you so fixated on attacking him right now? She asked. I leaned back in my seat at the question, formulating an answer. He is an unknown, I said slowly. We face two threats right now, the Mindbreaker and the waves. The waves are predictable, they come every 3 days and we can plan around them, knowing what they entail. The Mindbreaker, not so much. He could attack at any time and he could very well be planning something now. I do not want to leave a threat like that to stew when the end of the tutorial is coming. It's better to end it now before he can cause trouble. I stated firmly. My mind would not be changed on this. Both logic and my instincts were telling me to deal with the growing threat now so I could turn my attention fully to the waves. There was a lingering feeling that the tutorial wasn't done throwing challenges at us. We would need to be ready to face them, and having the Mindbreaker running free was not conducive to that goal. Plus, he owed me a debt. I understand, but I can't leave my camp. In the event you fail, I made a face at that, but she hurried to continue. I'm not saying you will, just in the possibility that you do, I need to be ready to defend against the next wave. I'm not willing to risk everything on this. Every person lost is one who could have helped defend during the waves. I think it is best to wait him out and force him to come to us. Defending is always easier than attacking. The only reason I'm going along with this is because I can't stop you. A snort nearly came out of my nose at that. It would have been funny to see her try. With only my silence answering her, she continued. I've done everything I can to make my camp as defendable as possible. Traps litter the area and our defenses are as strong as they can be, all in the hopes that it is enough. I will not go risking everything just to kill one man. She had her opinion and I had mine. It seemed like we wouldn't be getting anywhere if we continued this conversation. Changing gears, I switched to getting as much equipment out of her as she was willing to give. She would rather see me succeed than fail and was much more likely to risk wasting points on lost equipment than on lost people. She gave us a bunch of consumables to use and a few things to attack with. It was a hefty amount of points, but nothing too large. It was aid, though, and I would take it. The total number of people coming was 27. Me and my family numbered 21 and 6 people were coming from Tracy's side. Kathy and Damien were the most noteworthy and the other 4 were people who had a bone to pick with the Mindbreaker. Their camps were attacked by him and they wanted revenge the same as us. After speaking with Tracy, our gear was packed and everyone was ready for our march. It would take a few hours to march there, but we would be ready to attack the next morning. Felt like we were marching to war. Chapter 99 Plan. Our trek there took most of the afternoon and we arrived just before sundown. We stayed a distance away from the camp and made sure Kathy scouted the area so we remained unseen. I didn't think we would remain hidden the entire time leading up to the attack, but it didn't hurt to try. The longer we remained unnoticed, the less time the Mindbreaker got to plan his response. If he didn't know we were there, he wouldn't have as much time to prepare when we started attacking. We were a pylon away for the night and would close the distance the next morning. It was unusually quiet while we set up camp and I could tell the nerves were getting to people. This would be an assault on a heavily fortified position. The first time we had laid siege to a camp rather than defended one. The only thing we had left to do was scout the camp with our own eyes and confirm our plan of attack. All we had intel-wise was what Kathy could gather from her birds. They were great and were a massive boon, but for something like this, I wanted to see it for myself before cementing a plan of attack. It was too dark for that tonight and we set up a watch rotation for the night before tucking in. Nervous jitters ran through the camp that night, but I slept like a rock. Tomorrow held nothing new for me. I had attacked a camp before and I had killed before. Tomorrow would just have more of it. I was confident in my strength and only grew more confident after getting my bloodline. I was as prepared as I could be. Attacking from the west gives us the high ground, but there are no trees for cover like in the south, Hal said, pointing at both areas on the map. The north and east are both suboptimal directions of attack. We would have to run up a hill to get there. Sam mentioned the other two directions. Braden, how long will it take to set up the trebuchets? I asked our resident builder. We couldn't carry the fully built siege weapons with us and had to break them down into pieces. Scott and Braden would work together to put them together, which should speed things up, but I still didn't know how long that would take. We had been at this for close to an hour, hashing out different plans of attack, trying to come up with the best one since the sun had come up. It wasn't only the council participating either. Everyone was privy to the same information, and we all stood around the map coming up with ideas. I was no war general, and this would be my first planned attack. I wanted everyone's input. If our army was larger, something like this would be unfeasible, but we only had 30 people. Hearing everyone's thoughts didn't create that much chaos. People's lives were on the line, and I wasn't going to deny their counsel, especially when I had no experience with planning a siege. What Austin and I did shouldn't be considered a plan, and it wouldn't even be helpful for this camp. The gate was too strong for me to try that tactic again. I had some ideas about an avenue of attack, and one had started forming ever since I saw the camp. The camp itself was even more defensible than the one Tracy had down south. The walls were higher at a towering 25 feet, and it looked thicker as well. Numerous siege weapons were dotting the wall that all looked store-bought rather than handmade. It looked like a fortress, a heavily defensible fortress. It was almost daunting to look at from the eyes of the attacker. I don't think I will be able to smash through the gate, I said. No one had asked, but our usual method of attack wouldn't work on this camp. The gates here had the same metal portcullises that Tracy's did, which made my ability to smash them open less than zero. My hammer would break before I got through. Will the explosives we brought get through it? Austin asked. All of us couldn't help but look over at Kathy. She was the lead for the people that had tagged along, and she knew the capabilities of the consumables best. I am uncertain. It would take more than one most likely, but how many, I don't know, she said. The doubt in her tone was clear to all of us. It went around like this for a while, where someone would bring up an idea before someone else shot it down. All the while, the idea I had before came back. It was something I had thought the moment I laid eyes on the camp and saw its thick walls and heavy gate. The sheer task ahead of us prompted me to pivot my thinking. Why do we need to breach the walls? I asked. There are no civilians in there or people we need to spare. We aren't going to stay after we conquer it either. Why don't we just burn it to the ground? Connor, do you have any poisons that would work? I added. Everyone got a bit quiet after that and thought it over. That's a bit dark, Chris, Abigail said. And I'm pretty sure that's a war crime. Hearing it out loud made me hear how dark it was. I suggested burning down a whole camp while people were still in it, and in the next breath suggested gassing them. Well, it's not like there are any non-combatants. Everyone inhabiting that camp is an enemy. Why should we risk attacking the walls when we can smoke them out? I stuck by my idea. He is right. There's no one in there we intend to spare, Austin added with a shrug. It took everyone a moment to skip over the fact it was technically a war crime. Now that I thought about it, there were no more war crimes anymore. If there were no countries and civilians weren't held to the Geneva Convention, then there were no rules of war. All we have to do is make sure the man doesn't sneak away afterward, I said before looking at Kathy. I understand. I'll make sure he won't get away, she said resolutely. She gave a swift nod to match as well. Rachel, what's the range of your skills? I asked. I'm not sure for something like this. I wouldn't really have to aim, just launch them as far as I can. I would say around 300 yards, maybe more. It would jack up the mana cost though to keep the skill together for that long, she said, thinking it over. Connor, how much poison did you bring? Austin asked for me. We have a few jars that we intended to use for traps and the like, Abigail answered for him. It most likely won't be enough for the whole camp. I can make more, but it will take me a minute, Connor added on. Well, if we're doing this, my dad muttered. Can you make anything flammable? Like some kind of aerosol that will spread the fire? Connor looked thoughtful before nodding. Yeah, I can make something like that. It might explode though. The slight tug of a smile on his face was only a tad disturbing. Connor's experiments had the tendency to do that, and it wouldn't be the first time he would need burns healed. If we do that, the monsters will stream out of all 4 gates and surround us, Jonathan pointed out. Getting them out of the camp would make fighting them a lot easier, but it would also bring their numbers to bear. We were grossly outnumbered, and fighting on an open field would leave us at a disadvantage. Well, they would be at a disadvantage. I would be fine. Do you think you can raise earth walls strong enough to block the other gates off? It wouldn't have to be too sturdy, just enough for them to decide going through a different gate would be faster than breaking through. It would make things easier if we limited where they came from and how many can exit the camp at once. I asked. I would have to get close to do it, and I won't be able to get to all 3 gates in time. I would be lucky to get one, Jonathan said. Plus, would that be before or after we launched our attack? That was a good point. If he ran around before we attacked, he would be the sole target and all the attacks would rain down on him. If he did it after, their attention would be split from escaping the fire and attacking the person running around the camp. What if I go with you? My ice is hard to get through and I can help block off the gates, I said. That could work, but that still doesn't answer when we are doing it, Jonathan said. We wouldn't have to do it right away. We could open with long-range attacks and only rush to block off the gates when the person controlling the monsters orders them to leave the camp. We have to remember only one person is controlling them. They won't act like normal people would. They will stay and burn for far longer than you might think. Rachel brought up. It was another thing I had failed to think about. We weren't planning a battle against beasts where their survival instincts would make their actions predictable. Nor were we planning against people who would rush away from the flames. This was all under the control of one person, and it would be up to him for how the camp reacts. Normally, if a camp was on fire, people would run away to escape it. That wasn't necessarily the case now. The Mindbreaker could hole up in the keep while his entire army burned around him, not caring about their lives. At what point do you think he will decide leaving the camp is better than staying behind the walls? Even if he doesn't value their lives, he wouldn't watch his entire army burn. Scott asked. No one had an answer for that. Kathy can warn us of any movement and we can rush to block off the gates after that. With her warning, not many should be able to get out before we block them off, Abigail said. That would make blocking them off harder. We would not only have to deal with attacks from the wall but have to fight through people in our way. Jonathan noted. It would take longer to do it that way, but it was the best we came up with. If we are getting them out of the camp, where do we plan on fighting them at? Damien pipped in. He hadn't said much during the meeting and mostly kept to himself, but raised a good point. I was just planning to do what I always did. Fight wherever my enemy was, moving to where they were rather than the other way around. It worked for me because I was so much more powerful than them. Usually, I didn't have to consider terrain that much. When they charge out of the camp, they will most likely go toward wherever we put the siege weapons. He would order them to attack them first to get us to stop bombarding him with them. Sam said, I can build up some fortifications around them, but I'm not sure how strong they will be, Braden added. We can line the way there with traps as well. Both store-bought and what I can make. Allison pointed out. We spent the next few minutes scrutinizing the map for the best spot to attack from. We had to consider more than just the high ground. Which path had the easiest places to plant traps, which path was the most defensible, which path, so on and so forth. It was a lot to keep track of. I wasn't sure it would have turned out as well if I had planned it alone. There were too many things I didn't consider. I saw monster, I smashed monster. Everyone else here had a different thought process than me. The way they went about it was different, and it made sure we had the best plan possible. I was glad that it was all coming together so well. We went over a few more details, but the gist of the plan stayed the same. Smoke them out, lead them into where we wanted them, then decimate them. It was the best we could come up with, and I could only hope it would work. We had contingencies in case things went wrong, which they no doubt would, fallback lines that we would make as well, but we couldn't think of everything. As my dad helpfully pointed out, no plan survives contact with the enemy. We had things set up to mitigate that though. Kathy would keep everyone informed of what was going on and Abigail would coordinate everything. All we had to do now was wait. Connor was brewing up nasties in his cauldron, and Scott and Braden started constructing our defenses. Austin was running back to our pylon to make last-minute purchases that we hadn't thought of. In a few hours, we would be ready. Chapter 100 Siege. Ready. Heave. Scott and Braden worked in tandem to reset the trebuchets after firing off yet another set of boulders. Our attacks had started not long ago, and we had a mesmerizing opening volley. Rachel opened with a truly massive fireball that lit up the sky as it flew through the air. Her skill, ritual casting, worked to ease the burden on her mana pool and spread out the cost. Other mages added to the sight with their own skills along with the few rangers with us. Hal powered up a massive power shot, while Carrie blotted out the sky with an innumerable arrow rain. The last ranger was from Tracy's camp and was less impressive but contributed all the same. Add to that 2 flaming boulders the size of a car sailing toward the camp, and it was a glorious opening salvo. It was nothing like our first days where our volleys consisted of a couple of arrows and a handful of magic bolts. We were using giant magical projectiles, a hail of arrows, and actual siege weapons. It was slightly astonishing how far we had come in just under 3 months. Rachel had connected to a few mages who couldn't reach far enough to attack with ritual casting, and everyone she was connected with through the skill was using meditation to regen their mana as fast as possible. The warriors without any long-range capabilities mostly sat around and watched the bombardment, occasionally doing the physical labor that was required when things needed moving or adjusting, but mostly just helped reset the trebuchet arms so they could fire again. One of the mages that came along from Tracy's camp had an earth affinity like Jonathan and worked to pull up giant boulders from the ground for the trebuchets to use. He pulled up massive chunks of stone, evened them out, packed them down, and loaded them into the sling while Scott and Braden worked with other warriors to crank arms down and lifting the counterweight into place. The 3 were working together flawlessly to keep up a constant bombardment on the camp. Before the boulders were launched, oil was poured over them and lit on fire to add to the damage they did. Running back to buy the oil was a good decision. It added to the damage significantly, and it was well worth the time spent doing it. Austin, being the fastest beside me, ran back to our camp to buy it earlier in the day. Our siege had begun a smidge past noon when everything was ready and in place for the battle to come. Allison was still out planting traps, but that was just the cherry on top compared to the rest of our preparations. Every once in a while, some of Connor's nasties were loaded into the siege weapon and launched into the camp. Where they exploded left either a cloud of poison or highly flammable mist in the area. Whenever the next fireball from Rachel or flaming boulder hit it, a massive explosion echoed out that we could hear from even where we were hundreds of yards away. One even carried a napalm-like substance that still burned in the area where it had landed. He constantly loaded new ingredients into his cauldron to keep up with the demands we asked of him. Not wanting to be left out, I created massive balls of ice to launch into the camp, but they hadn't turned out that well. To get the distance needed, I couldn't make them too big or I wouldn't be able to throw them far enough, and the size I could throw didn't do that much. While my strength was high, it was more because of the ergonomics that hindered me so. While disappointing, I had to be ready for Kathy's signal and couldn't get too involved with the ranged attacks. I deemed throwing spears of ice not worth the effort and saved myself for the battle to come later. I would have my time to shine soon. A few of the other mages fired off long-range skills, and one of them even had the artillery mage class. They did the most damage behind Rachel, and their skills were designed for such a use. The only thing making Rachel outdo them was the fact she was using more than just her mana pool. Everyone had been nervous when the siege started, but Rachel's words proved true when the army inside the camp didn't come streaming out of the gates in response to our attack. They sat and waited in the camp, launching attacks back at us, but stayed behind the walls while we were free to continue attacking. It was like they were all waiting for orders that had yet to come. It seemed like our surprise had worked somewhat because the thralls were lethargic to respond. Everyone knew it wouldn't last, but we would take the extra time we were given. The first problem we had run across during our attack was that there wasn't a lot to burn in the camp. Thralls didn't need houses or buildings like we did, and the Mindbreaker had declined to build any for his army. There were only a few wooden buildings inside the camp, and most were already aflame. The only real structure inside the camp was the stone keep in the center, and we weren't able to set that one alight. To compensate for the lack of burnable material, Jars of the oil were occasionally launched to help spread the flames alongside the napalm substance Connor whipped up. It worked to spread the flame quickly, and wafts of black smoke rose into the air. I wasn't sure how hot it was in there, but it looked smoldering from where I was standing. Given the morning to prepare, Connor had come up with an aerosolized poison that mixed with the smoke of the flames to linger in the air and turn it into a toxic cloud. While not the most lethal, it worked to hinder and weaken the army stationed inside the camp. Our bombardment was causing casualties, but there were still a lot of them up and moving around. Anything to weaken the melee to come was a boon in my book. Every time I thought he couldn't make anything worse, he took it as a personal challenge to prove me wrong. If pain was a response they could act on, they would surely be trying to flee the camp by now. After our opening shot, the catapults and siege weapons lining the walls fired on our position, and I finally got to figure out if I could tank them. The answer was yes. Jonathan and I worked together to create shields of stone and ice respectively over the entire group to block the boulders launched in our direction, while Austin speared some of the incoming boulders with beams of light, exploding them prematurely. For the initial attacks, I had used only Ice Fortress to defend, and it nearly cost me. The boulder had smashed through the ice of the skill and nearly hit me head-on. My quick reactions and instincts were the only thing to save me from eating the boulder in the face. After that, my law and ice manipulation worked to strengthen my skill, and the empowered Ice Fortress was enough to deflect the boulders. If they hit straight on, they would explode and shatter my ice, which was both annoying and slightly painful. Using ice manipulation as I held a clear feeling over all the ice I was empowering, and it wasn't pleasant to have it shatter to pieces while I was trying to keep it together. Jonathan's stone held up better to the bombardment than my ice, which only added to my frustrations. His skills were suited to defending against attacks like this, and even though it shouldn't have, my competitiveness flared. He had skills like Stone Aegis, Stone Empowerment, and others to complement his stone and empower it further, while I relied on Ice Fortress, and my law. Jonathan's own law permeated the stone he pulled up, which only made it stronger and evened the playing field between us. If it were a competition on durability, I would be losing. This went on until something finally changed and Kathy gave her signal. The people and monsters inside the gate were finally stirring and were given orders to follow. Both Jonathan and I knew we were up. I gave him a look and said, "Good luck, my friend." "Godspeed," he said back. After that, we both took off toward the camp, heading toward opposing gates. Our attack commenced from the southwest, and we planned to leave only the southern gate open. It had the most vegetation and obstacles for us to use for cover and place traps for the enemies that would come streaming out of the gate. Jonathan would take the western gate while I went around to the eastern gate before both of us met in the north. As we started our charge, both our respective armors coalesced around us. Stone and earth flowed up from the ground, covering Jonathan from the ground up in a thick plating of stone, while ice condensed and froze around me all the same. I didn't even wield my hammer, leaving it tied to my back to give me one less thing to worry about. I wasn't planning to fight, only block the gates and get back as quickly as possible. After we left, Austin had to pick up the slack of defending the boulders raining down on our position, but he was up to the task. He didn't have the same reservations about evolving as I did, and had done so already. He didn't feel it was necessary to wring everything he could before evolving, and chose to do so ahead of me. His new class stayed the same rarity and was a powerful rare spear-wielding class. His new E-rank class was strong, and he gained a well-deserved power boost. He even bought some of the materials needed for his racial trait. When we were told it would start small, I hadn't expected to start that small. He didn't appear any different visually, but when he called upon his bloodline, faint wings of light appeared on his back. They weren't able to give him lift yet, or anything close really, but he was hopeful they would get better when he evolved to D-rank. The genetic material he used was the wings of the Golden Sun Eagle along with their feathers and blood. His goal was to give himself wings temporarily when he called upon his bloodline. The materials he used were expensive, but since he didn't need to save up for a bloodline anymore, he could more than afford it. The new skill he got was something that he could use to threaten even me at the right time, and was one of the main reasons we started the siege at noon. Just like I got stronger the colder it was around me, he got stronger the higher the sun was in the sky. He was most powerful right now when he could harness the powers of the sun at their zenith, and we used that to our advantage. Slinging out beams of light that shattered the incoming boulders and seared smoking lines of black across the sky. My mad dash toward the camp reminded me of the last time I did this, and I couldn't help but chuckle. I was beginning to surprise myself with the amount of times I was charging into a sea of attacks headed toward me. The attacks couldn't keep up with my speed, and those that could were weak enough for me to smash through. I made it to the eastern gate without too much trouble and started using both Hail, Sea, and Ice Fortress, to block it off. I poured a generous amount of mana into both before topping it off with Ice Manipulation, to pack everything down. It was a rush job, but it would take time to get through. The last thing I did before moving on was empower it all with my law. It would help if they attempted to burn it and keep it from melting due to the heat. From the start of it all, I had a lingering feeling of doubt. Everything had gone too smoothly, and I couldn't help but worry something was going to go wrong. Our attack had gone off without a hitch, and now we were moving on to phase 2 all without any major hiccups. It was unnerving. The camp was set ablaze, and the answer we had expected to come did. It was like this was all choreographed, but I was missing something. This was the threat that I had been worried about and deemed necessary to eliminate, but everything had gone by smoothly. I left the eastern gate behind and moved on toward the northern one. It didn't take me long to get there, and Jonathan was already there blocking it. I added some of my ice to the stone that was already there, and we both ran back toward our places for the plan to come. We would be the vanguard standing down in front of the mages and siege weapons, and the time for that was coming soon. The thralls were all gushing out of the only gate open, streaming toward our position to the southwest. Jonathan and I completed our circuit around the camp and met up with all of the other warriors standing at the ready. I tore the hammer from my back and twirled it around me, smashing it into the ground. We were ready. It was time to end this.